Welcome. Today, excited about today's meeting that we've got in terms of our panel, our collaborators that we've got. Super excited about the people that we've got around the table to continue this important conversation around graduation pathways. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. One thing that you will notice is that we have a different graphic recorder. I've dipped into my pool of people that I know in this business and now have the best. Don't tell Mike that because I'll say he's the best next time he's back. But I've got Brandon Morgan here today, and Brandon, we're excited to have you here, continuing our graphic recording. For those that want to see the work that's been done, A, that's on the website, and B, they're back there if you want to take a visual walk through the past three meetings as well. One other housekeeping item, please, when you are speaking, talk into the mic. That's one of the things that we hear at meetings is some people are easy to hear, some are. If you get up close to the mic, if you can hear yourself coming through like you can me right now, then you'll be able to be heard for those that are live streaming. So please do that, and then it'll come through on the recording as well, and then I won't be getting messages from people that I need to make people talk louder and yell at you and so forth. So that'd be good as well. Another thing that I wanted to bring up real quick is, and panel members all know this, want to make sure that the public has seen this as well, is that from the conversations that we've had thus far, it really became evident to me, and I know others on here as well, and I've heard back from several who have said that they really like the fact that we've done this, but we have added 2 meetings to this for further conversation, and 2 in one day. So for those that are now questioning, I'm hearing Senator Cruz over here. 2 in one day. We tried to be efficient on the 3rd of October, and so from 9 to noon that day, we're going to have a further conversation with business leaders to really dig into that piece of that. We felt like we were continuing to hear from them, and we wanted to expand that conversation. And then also another conversation that I felt like it was really important for us to also dig deeper into was with the colleges and universities. So we're excited to be expanding that list with collaborators so that we can spend time with them. And again, that meeting will be 1 to 4. There will be a break for lunch from 12 to 1, and so collaborators from both groups and panel members, we will have lunch for you as well. So that both of those meetings will be in this room that we are in right now. So I appreciate you all checking your calendars, working with us on that, and I apologize for those that day. If that day does not work, it's really tough as we try to pull this together and put this together for that. So as we're working toward with that 3rd and 4th week, coming toward the end of the listening phase, I just want to reiterate our goal for recommendations that our graduation pathways create an educated and talented workforce, not only to meet the needs of business and higher ed, but also to help students in whatever their chosen post-secondary endeavors are. And we've talked about those in some of the former meetings, whether that's the military, whatever that might be. We want our students to be ready for that and to be successful in those. And at our last meeting, and I thought this was good, and I think it's important to reiterate that, we had Representative Boehning clarified the purpose of the creation of the panel, and I just want to restate my understanding for this panel and the public, and just to make sure that we're all on the same page. The purpose of the panel is to create a new system for determining if a student is ready to graduate high school. And I think that's where we really are with this process. Representative Boehning, have I summarized that correctly? Thank you for the nod there. At this meeting, we're going to continue what we started with the last one. We had reports at the last meeting from CHE and the Chamber, and we talked about the work ethics certificate. At this one, we're going to talk about another study. Alan Taylor's going to handle that discussion, and so we're excited about that. I'm also excited again for all the school leaders that are here today, superintendents, principals, and leaders in lots of other facets, and we're excited to, again, continue this discussion. On the agenda, we've got a review that Mike Flesh will do. I did not want to burden Brandon with doing a review from meetings that he hadn't been at, so I'm just going to really quickly talk about 2 or 3 items here that I think from the last meeting with the counselors and teachers that I think are important. A theme that really came out is how do we value an expansive experience for our students? And I think that gets to what we've been calling, to really value the mountainous challenge that we have here to create this, but how do we value the expansive experience? We talked a lot about a work ethics certificate and where we might start if we look at stackable skills for students. That's been talked about a lot, and again back to the flexibility piece, and we began to look at what that looks like as to how we can be flexible in this process. And then the teachers and counselors, again, really wanted us to make sure as we look through this that they're able to do what they do and be able to be creative and really work with and continue the relationships with the students that are so very, very important. And lastly, from a point that was really talked about both in that particular convening and the one prior to with parents and students, is how we need to start earlier. That was a theme that continued to come out, is how do we start this earlier so that students really have a chance to begin to think through what they're interested in and what those are. And so those are the things that from a review standpoint, I thought really stood out there, and I know Mike would probably have gone for 10 minutes more, but I would rather us get to public comment and hear what others have to say. So we are going to go to public comment. Just want to remind us, we have several, right? And we have several. So we are going to hold you to the 3 minutes and be strict on that. Just know that. And again, that's not to limit anyone, but we want to make sure that we get through all of those, and we have time allotted for this, an hour allotted for this. So with that, and then again, I think it's best practice from a public comment standpoint. Let's listen to what folks have to say. We won't engage. We'll listen to their comments, and again, hold those to 3 minutes. So with that, we have public comment. We're switching up on me a little bit. Public comment is over here to my right in that corner with a microphone. And again, please speak into the microphone, and we will begin.
Reed Peters, Community High School.
Good morning. I'm Grant Peters, Principal of Greensboro Community High School. Thank you, graduation faculty panel, for the opportunity for all high school principals to speak publicly and express thoughts for this very important endeavor. I, too, would like to congratulate and commend this panel for the progress that has been documented in the board meeting minutes. This broad and reflective approach will ensure that we do what is best for students throughout the state. We all want to challenge and prepare our students for life after high school, but I would like to highlight a couple of considerations. Please consider these three actual student situations. Student A. This particular student is excelling in academics and is on track to receive dual credit in multiple courses. Her strength in math classes has her on track to complete calculus or physics, but she hasn't quite yet decided. In fact, she will meet the STGEC requirements from Ivy Tech that will ensure that she receives 30 hours. Student B has just started a welding class on campus and seems to think of this as a possibility for a career. He hasn't been this interested in a class since elementary and has struggled with testing of any type, not just standardized. Right now, his GPA is at 2.3, but he cannot quite find a way to raise that. He also understands he has not always been the most motivated student, but anyone that has his home life probably wouldn't react much differently. Student C is incredibly well-liked and brings a smile on his face most days. He doesn't allow his disabilities to define him, but he has failed algebra on 2 occasions. Multiple staff members attempt to engage him in alternative ways, but counselors struggle to create a class schedule that will give him the specific credits and the number of credits he actually needs. He will continue to work hard and do the best that he can, and he is still very unsure about how he will support himself after high school. These three situations are incredibly diverse and don't even include many other major student conflicts, such as child neglect, social issues with students, and poverty, etc. Please remember these factors and these students as we move towards a solution. I would also ask that we consider taking time to phase this into practice. If this decision impacts our current freshmen, they will already have 1/4 of their high school career finished based off a plan that is obsolete or outdated. If possible, this plan needs to be solidified in the junior high grades to ensure that we can do what's best for students as they enter high school. All that I ask and that we ask from Greensboro Community High School is that we have versatility in our future plans. And please consider the hardworking teachers, administrators, counselors, and interested parents and community members as we move forward with this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Troy Inman, Pike Township.
Good morning. My name is Troy Inman. I'm the principal of Pike High School in the MSD of Pike Township here in Indianapolis. We're in a unique district with a majority minority population, students from $1 million homes all the way down to government assistant housing, and our student members are just as diverse. I want to thank, first of all, you guys for implementing the student growth model at the high school. This is the first year that we've used that, and that data that we received is going to be very helpful for our teachers. Secondly, I think no matter what type of diploma we offer or we award, I think it has to be included in accountability and graduation rates. It's so problematic to offer a diploma to a student that's an official diploma, but knowing it won't count towards your grad rate or your accountability. And third, please consider lessening or adding flexibility to testing. Currently, we lose almost 20 days of instruction due to testing. In the large high schools, we have to run everything through our English classes. That's the only clear grade level class. And again, that's a high accountability area, and we're just losing instructional time. So again, some flexibility there with ISTEP or ECAs, or adding some additional testing would be very helpful. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Jim D'Agostino, Mill Creek.
Good morning. My name is Jim DiAgostino, and I'm the proud superintendent of Mill Creek Community Schools, Hendricks County, Clayton, Indiana. I'm a proud member of the Indiana Association of School Superintendents and the Indiana School Business Officials. My colleagues across Indiana understand we need to have options available to all. However, we also understand the reality that every community in Indiana is unique in their opportunities. The flexibility to have options that can be implemented for our students in our district is very important. The ability to maintain local control remains an important factor for myself, our school board, and our school community. We are elated that we no longer have this narrow pathway that everyone must follow to the graduation diploma. We are grateful we are empowering our local officials, district and building administrators to maximize the opportunities for Mill Creek students, and more specifically for high school students at Cascade High School. We want the graduates of Cascade High School to walk across the stage with a diploma in one hand and a career pathway in the other. We want our cadets to be the most prepared for whichever career pathway they choose. We believe that by moving to a single Indiana high school graduation diploma while providing pathway categories, distinctions, stackable credentials, and options, we would have the flexibility within those categories and options to use the resources and partnerships available. We believe that costs could be shared through these partnerships and with the resources available within that menu of options. We need to be realistic about our pathways. What skills will place our students in the best position to compete and succeed at the next level? We support the flexibility for our students to change career pathways. ECAs are an option, but what level of math is expected in that diploma? Is it Algebra 2? Is it trigonometry? Is it prop and stat? Is it financial literacy? Is it business math? We do not favor Ohio's model of having 7 ECA exams. We support financial literacy component in the pathways as it impacts all career pathways. We support higher level math options other than Algebra 2 to earn the diploma.
30 seconds.
We support local flexibility and utilization of local resources. We have opportunities for our cadets to take advantage of. Increasing our graduation rates in Indiana directly impacts economic development opportunities. CHS has remained high graduation rates. Thank you for your service on this committee and the opportunity to share my thoughts on behalf of the Mill Creek Community School Corporation and Cascade High School.
Thank you.
Sboe, Muncie.
Long legs and table legs. So, good morning. I'm Steve Ball. I'm the superintendent of the Muncie Community Schools. I'm appreciative of the opportunity to address the graduation panel this morning. I'm here to speak about the issues surrounding the high school diploma system. There are 2 primary questions to address, I believe. The first is what's the correct scope of knowledge for students to possess prior to crossing the stage and earning a diploma. I would respectfully suggest that's an academic discussion that needs to continue, but answering that question should not be the focus of today's meeting. I think any graduation criteria developed should have multiple pathways in multiple ways to earn that diploma. It's important that Indiana consider pathways that include internships, work-study opportunities, as well as academic options. Students considering a trade, skilled labor, or the military sometimes are more likely to actually engage in the content taught in context and not in traditional academic settings. I would urge the committee to come up with a solution that works towards a stackable set of criteria. A more practical question emerges in light of the Every Student Succeeds Act. How does Indiana want to be viewed by potential business investors, other states, and parents themselves? The current situation with the general diploma creates several potential issues. It makes sense to create a single standardized high school diploma that would allow additional certifications or badges to be added to acknowledge additional accomplishments. Simply reporting graduation rates without including the general diploma students would potentially create significant hardships for Indiana schools. Without the current general diploma holder being reported as a true graduate of a high school, many special education students will struggle to graduate. At Muncie Central, 84% of students with special needs who earn a diploma receive a general diploma. Presenting a 16% graduation rate for students with IEPs may set Indiana up for some significant problems with IDEA compliance. It would almost certainly cause problems for the DOE with the state if students with disabilities graduated at a rate of less than a quarter of students without disabilities. Like any new legislation or policy, it's important to talk about the unintended consequences of what is being deliberated. Many students may opt for homeschooling as a pathway to graduation that would not otherwise have been chosen. This could result in substandard educational experience for students presently in our Indiana schools. Another consequence is that some students may become discouraged with their course experiences and opt out of school altogether. This will create an Indiana educational experience where many more students have to enroll in HSE programs in the future. Although an HSE is a better end for students than being a dropout, many options are limited to those holding only an SEC. Even
30
military
seconds.
service is limited there. Another potential concern is that the student may reform Algebra 2 courses to lower academic standards in those courses that will negatively impact students at the Core 40 and honors level. That's unacceptable when more than 75% of our current graduates need some sort of remediation when entering higher education. Again, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Mary Burton, Northeast Indiana Special Ed Co-op.
Thank you. My name is Mary Burton, and I'm the Executive Director for the Northeast Indiana Special Education Cooperative. We're the largest co-op in the state with 13 school districts. I'm also speaking on behalf of the Indiana Council of Administrators of Special Education, also known as ICASE. Thank you for your time. Success is as individual as our students. Success can take many forms. All students can achieve success in their life, but it's not our responsibility to determine what success should be for all students. It's our responsibility as educators to provide all students with a variety of opportunities and supports to succeed. Some students choose to attend a post-secondary college or university. Some students prefer to pursue a trade, and while others prefer to enter directly into the workforce. In order for each of these students to achieve success, options or a variety of pathways toward a diploma must be available for them. Graduation pathways must be flexible and provide options for all learners. A learner's chosen graduation pathway must be relevant and attainable for each individual student. All schools must have equitable access to all pathways with required training opportunities and coursework regardless of geographical location. Indiana needs skilled workers and must value the vocational preparation programs and the achievements students are making in these programs. Many of our students with disabilities are participating and succeeding in these programs. With hard work and determination, they are earning a general diploma and going on to be productive members of society. Currently, these same hardworking students are required to opt out of the Core 40 diploma, commonly considered a college prep diploma. It is clear to all the students, to all that the student's diploma of choice, the general diploma, is of lesser value. Another option for consideration is to offer one diploma to all students. Academic or vocational certifications with specific criteria may be added to the diploma according to a student's chosen course of study. This option would allow for the rigor that we're expecting from all of our students while respecting and valuing individual learning differences. Rigor for one isn't always attainable for another. Indiana needs to respect each and every learner's unique differences and develop a variety of outcomes so each student may have an opportunity to achieve or define his or own success. Thank you.
Thank you.
Laura Hammock, Brown County Schools.
Good morning, my name is Laura Hammock and I'm the proud superintendent of Brown County Schools. We're a small school district of 1,881 students. However, we are large geographically because we need room for all of those trees. We also need to get you guys down there in the month of October. Brown County is absolutely beautiful this time of year. I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning and also want to offer my thanks for the work that you're doing for the students of Indiana. This is hard work and it's very important work, and for that, we thank you. So up until now, Brown County High School has stood on a graduation rate for which we've been extraordinarily proud. In school year 15-16, our graduation rate was 99.3%. And in school year 16-17, we certified a graduation rate of 99.3%. The fraction of that percent translated to one student each year. This graduation rate doesn't happen because the boys and girls come to us with the background knowledge and experiences to just automatically graduate from high school. This graduation rate happens because of the incredible educators in Brown County who wrap their arms around all of our students and absolutely insist on their graduation from high school. So you can imagine that the news about Indiana's diploma options and the connectivity to S's definition hit Brown County schools very hard when we realized that under the new language, the graduation rate for Brown County High School in 15-16 would have been 57%, and in 16-17 would have been 70%. Our school district was just chosen to receive a massive grant from the Lilly Foundation's Regional Opportunity Initiative. Through that work, we've been identified as a ready school for aligning curricular and programmatic offerings for the educational and workforce needs of Southwest Central Indiana. For the past year, we have engaged with community and business leaders in the areas of life science, defense, and advanced manufacturing. In every conversation, these leaders are begging for graduates who own professional skills. They support a rigorous system for graduation that is also realistic. There are highly paid jobs that are going unfilled for high school graduates in Southwest Central Indiana because our students can't pass a drug screen for security clearance at Crane, not because the student couldn't pass Algebra 2. We have been told that students who fill these jobs should be engaged in mathematic options that engage higher order thinking and problem solving skills, rigor that is tied to their post-secondary success. These industry leaders also shook their heads at the amount of testing that we conduct.
30 seconds.
We unpacked our assessments with them during a 3-day institute this summer, and they asked us honestly, how do you teach? They want us to be engaging our students in workforce readiness skills that will actually translate into adding value to their organizations, and they see a bunch of assessments as the furthest thing from realizing their goal. Please consider an efficient model of assessments that allows the incredible work of our educators to be accomplished. We are committed to aligning our curricular programming to the needs of the workforce, and we need your help in getting this done.
Thank you.
Dan Ulrich, Indiana Association of CTE Directors.
Good morning, Chairman Ernest, members of the Pathway Panel. My name is Dan Ulrich. I'm the Executive Director of the Indiana Association of Career and Technical Education Districts. And I want to express thanks for the opportunity to offer input regarding the Indiana pathways. On behalf of the directors across the state, it's felt the Pathway Initiative is very important to our students. Regarding the graduation plans, we believe items of importance for your consideration include the following. Concentrators in career and technical education. As career and technical education enrollment has increased in the past 3 years, so have our concentrators. Students earning dual credits. Regarding their pathway, this helps them prepare for post-secondary success, and many of our CT concentrators have attained dual credits. In fact, it's over 50%. Industry recognized certifications which have markedly increased over the past several years. Rigorous quantitative reasoning courses related to pathway studies. And quality work-based experiences directly related to the pathway as a capstone experience. Critically important to the directors across the state is that all graduation pathway plans are valued equally by parents, by students, and the community. Governor Pence referred to this as two Plan A's, not a Plan A and a Plan B. The pathways should have flexibility, and I've heard that mentioned several times, as options for all of our students across the state of Indiana. They come from schools and localities which are all different. I mentioned several items. These could be stackable as well. Finally, if I may, I would like to end by referring to some thoughts by Dr. Vince Bertram, who is CEO of Project Lead the Way. In his new book, Dream Differently, the world cares about what we can do. Great careers built relative to skills and knowledge is of value in our society and provides opportunities for our students to lead happy and successful lives. This is why the pathway work that's being undertaken is so important, and I applaud this panel and the collaborators for the work that you're undertaking. Thank you for allowing me to share a few words today regarding this important work, and thank you for allowing CTE to be represented through Alan Taylor and Patrick Baer's staff. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Richard Arkanoff, Center Grove Community Schools.
Good morning. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all, and I want to also thank you all for your efforts in taking and collecting the input from as many people as possible. I'm Dr. Rich Arkanoff, and I'm honored to serve as superintendent of the Center Grove Community School Corporation in Greenwood, Indiana, Johnson County. I'd like to begin by echoing the concepts that Dr. Butts and many of my colleagues have already shared with you. Indiana needs just one diploma, but it's critically important that we provide students with many multiple pathways to get to that one diploma. Multiple pathways to a single high school diploma allows us to better meet the needs of all students. A Core 40 diploma, as it stands today, is designed to prepare students to be successful in college. Most of our students can succeed in college, and that of course will help them throughout their lives. Many students, however, can find success and comfortable living wages serving society without a college degree. All students deserve the opportunity to earn a high school diploma that is relatively challenging. Providing students with a path to a high school diploma that best suits their interests can set them up for the next stage of their lives, whether that be a 2 to 4 year undergraduate institution or other types of certifications and trainings. Center Grove High School graduated 542 students in 2017. Of those 542 students, 54, which is 10%, graduated with a general diploma. I'd like to share with you a little bit about 3 of them. First, a student that we'll call Eric. He comes from a family of firefighters and began a firefighting and becoming a firefighter was his dream. He even worked as a volunteer firefighter and had taken classes in fire rescue program at Central 9. But Eric was not a strong math student. He is not able to pass the Algebra 2 course. In fact, Algebra 2 is the largest barrier we see for students trying to get a Core 40 diploma. The general diploma was a perfect option for him, as this allowed him to obtain a general diploma he needed to pursue his dream in becoming a firefighter. Eric will be successful on this career path and contribute to society and his community. The next example is a student I'll call John. He was a special education student who received a variety of supports in high school. His mother is a nurse, and he wanted to be one as well. And despite the support received, he struggled in school and took medical assistance courses at Central 9 and was able to graduate with a general diploma and he took that diploma and was accepted to Community College of Florida. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kayla Marshall, Teach Plus.
Good morning. My name is Kayla Marshall, and I'm a middle school teacher teaching STEM at Paramount School of Excellence, and I'm here today to speak on the importance of multiple graduation pathways. It's no secret that as humans, we all have unique skill sets, interests, and learning modalities, and I see this every day, multiple times a day, as a classroom teacher. I have a student, Dakota, and he's a smart, great young man. He volunteers to help out with anything that anyone needs, from carrying another student's backpack to delivering papers to the front office. Dakota's a visual learner, and he has a very particular set of interests. He likes cars. He draws cars, reads about cars, talks about cars, and works on cars. And as an 8th grader, he already knows how to change oil, brake pads, and air filters. The only time I can spark any kind of passion in Dakota is when I talk about cars. And believe me, I do at every opportunity. But as an 8th grader, Dakota's required to make a plan about what he envisions for his future. And by his own admission, he doesn't want to go to college. Dakota wants to work in his uncle's garage, as a mechanic, working on cars. That's his passion and that's his plan. I have another student, Brisa, and her dream's to be the first person in her family to attend college. and to eventually become a doctor, specifically a surgeon. Brisa is one of the most diligent and hardworking students I've ever had the privilege of teaching, and I have no doubt that Brisa is beyond capable of achieving whatever goal she sets for herself. I have 141 students, aside from Brisa and Dakota, and they're all uniquely talented. They all have bright futures and plans to help them achieve their goals. As a teacher, I do my best to help them obtain the knowledge and skills that they need for success, but to truly serve all students equitably, flexibility is required. Not all students want to attend college, and furthermore, not all students should attend college in order to be best prepared for their future plans. As a part of the education system, we need to offer a variety of options for students to help them best prepare themselves for successful futures, whether that be a collegiate experience, an apprenticeship, working in customer service, or in manufacturing. Students should have access to authentic real-life experiences to help them gain necessary skills. They should be given the opportunity to take dual credit courses, to obtain college credit, and to test drive college classes. These experiences shouldn't just be considered another class on their schedule.
30 seconds.
It should be considered as qualification for graduation because these experiences can be more preparatory than a test. Assessments can be one useful tool to ascertain a student's readiness, but it's not always the best option. You previously heard from industry employers, school leaders, students who have all agreed that having a variety of options to prepare students and gauge readiness is the most accurate and beneficial option for students. It's a waste of funding and other resources to require students to complete a graduation pathway that does not truly prepare them. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
That concludes public comment.
All right, we appreciate all of those that gave public comment this morning. We, as always, I have taken lots of notes personally on that as well, so appreciate all of those thoughts, great thoughts that you've brought before us this morning. Next on the agenda, and the Indiana Career Readiness Report had been brought up a couple of times. Alan Taylor had actually brought that up a couple of times, so we've asked him to lead us in a discussion or have a discussion about that data, good data that's in there. You all have been received that in your packets. You all have that at your table now as well. So, Alan, thanks for agreeing to help us have a little discussion about this, and I'm going to give it to you.
Thank you. I'll also look to Patrick and Beth, and so jump in as I run through this, and I'll share some of what I think are highlights. The Career Readiness Report really is a report on the performance of Indiana CTE and the performance of our CTE students. So when we look through this, and I think we've been reporting in this manner for at least 3 years, maybe 4 years. So I'll start with, really, we need to clarify how we categorize CTE students. We have what we refer to as CTE participants. And a participant is a student who has taken a CTE course, maybe one, maybe two, but just a couple of CTE courses. And when you look, that's where this report begins. You'll see, it starts on page 4, that we have most recent data around 175, or about 175,000 student CTE participants. That's about 54%, I think, of our overall high school enrollment. So it's a fairly good percentage. And then when you take a look at the second page, you'll see that other category, the concentrator. And that's an important definition in regards to CTE. The concentrator is a student who has taken 6 credits, a minimum of 6 high school credits within a CTE pathway, within a sequence of courses. And so you'll see we have about 28,000 CTE concentrators in the state. That's maybe, quick calculation, maybe 9 or 10% of our overall enrollment are CTE concentrators. And just of note, if you look at those two bar graphs, there really has been a concentrated and a conscious effort in Indiana to grow the number of CTE participators and concentrators and really programs. And you can see some of that evidence that it's increased each year for the past several years. That's an upward trend.
Hey, Alan, could I interrupt? Because as I studied this, and you're talking about the concentrators there, clearly those are successful students. And, you know, with 80% earning core 40, 30% with honors. What? Why? Do you have some causality? Now, as a CTE guy, I know what I think too. I would just like to talk a little bit about that.
Well, my initial reactions are focused. They're interested in their learning. And so as a result, we'll see a lot of the data, and most of this data in this report is reporting on CT concentrators, performance of CT concentrators. And for the most part, CT concentrators outperform students that aren't involved in CT. I think it's the focus and the interest in their learning would be my initial response.
So having some focus is valuable, is what we've seen on that.
Most educators would.
Right. Okay.
So, and we're going to work our way. I'll skip a couple. This is what I see as highlights, but certainly we can look at any aspect of this. Over on page 8, it starts in with some of the pathway exams. You'll see that again we've increased the number of students in our state that again these are all CT concentrators, performance of CT concentrators that have taken the and in the pathway exam. Now it looks like it's dipped a little bit, but if you look at the total number of students that have as we have increased the CT concentrators, the number of students that we are assessing has nearly doubled in the past couple of years. And then the dual credits, which we've mentioned several times, we've increased that as a state to over 50% of our students earn dual credits of some type by completing the CTE program. Industry certification, again, an upward trend that there's been a very conscious effort to increase the numbers of certifications offered and earned within the state. And that's a tough one because there's so many certifications, and what are the appropriate certifications? Lots of obstacles with costs also. But very clearly, we are increasing the number of certifications that our students are earning. Work-based learning, if you look, there's really no data provided, real meaningful data. We really have not reported that through the years. Just most recently, I think, Patrick, that might help me. Maybe last year might have been the first year or the previous year, but we've really not reported work-based learning. And again, we'll have to get some really good data. We've talked a lot about work-based learning around this panel the first 3 meetings, but we'll have to really define that a little more as a state to use that data. Defining the difference between a shadowing experience and an externship experience, an internship versus an internship experience. The way people use those descriptions are different, so we'll have to define that to the paid position, unpaid position. But we are trying to do that as a state. We're trying to we're asking schools to report some of the work-based learning activities. I think it's a very good thing. Page 10, I think Dr. Ernest cited. This is really, I think, a very powerful piece of data. You can see that really, very consistently, the CT concentrators graduate at a higher rate than the students that are not involved in CTE. So for many years, our state average has been around 89% graduation rate, and very consistently, CT concentrator graduation rates around 95%. Again, a little bit of an upward trend there also. And when you dip inside that, you look at the type of student that who are our CT concentrators. You'll see that about 30% of those students are obtaining some type of current diploma structure and academic or technical honor diploma. And about 50%, a little over 50%, or 440. And then when you take a look into the little pie chart over to the right of the next page, it really takes that 30% in honors and divides that into what type of diplomas 6% of that. Interestingly, only about 18% is technical honors. Maybe think that higher.
So does that split, Alan, when we show in 57% academic honors and then a quarter with both, are we tracking students into both instead of enabling them, or tracking students into one or the other instead of creating something where they can be both? That kind of back to the discussion 2 times ago with the students where, wow, I'm now CTE and I'm lower than low, or I'm academic. Am I making sense with that? That data would suggest that we're tracking you to either be either or, and I wonder if there's a way to be both. Does that make sense?
I think so. Patrick.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me today. I'm very excited to be here. Just a couple comments to answer your question, Dr. Ernest. There are many students who earn both, but given the demands of some of our post-secondary partners, academic honors is pushed very heavily. That's required for admission at some universities, is my understanding. So where students are capable of earning both, they are generally led toward that academic honors track. Just a couple other notes going back. Mr. Taylor had spoken to CTE students focusing in class, and there's definite truth to that. There's great information out of Georgetown University's Center for Education and Workforce regarding the relevance. Excuse me, I might need a water at some point. But regarding the relevance of learning in the classroom, thank you so much. Basically, if you go back to the middle school student earlier who enjoys automobiles, thank you very much. So he may love to change oil, he may not love his math class, but when he comes to an auto service program and he can see a picoscope, he can see how changing gear ratios affects fuel economy in cars. All of a sudden, math has a completely different implication than what it had when they were just looking at a textbook. The last thing I'd like to mention very quickly, and I know we'll get to some other points earlier, but when we talk about the value of students becoming concentrators in programs, how powerful that can be over the 1 year or 2 year experience for them, I want to note that the most disheartening thing for me as a CTE educator is when a student is very passionate about our programs, they're very successful in our programs, but they get pulled back to their home school to do ECA remediation because they were not successful in their first attempt. Thank you very much. I'm sure we'll have more conversation later.
Oh, excellent point, Patrick. Yeah, and I agree personally with everything Patrick said. So I agree. I think we try. We do that with many different ways. Some ways very directly, and other ways indirectly, just in our messaging. So.
Dave?
Good morning. Thanks for sharing this report. I have a question about rigor and accountability on 2 levels. One is at the program level, the other is at the student level. From a state public policy perspective, first question is how do we account and ensure for quality programs? What's the mechanism for that currently? That's one level. Second level is at the student level. How do we ensure that these students are meeting some kind of a standard and that it's rigorous? I think those are 2 important ingredients as public policy officials because we're responsible for ensuring that rigor and accountability. So how are we currently doing that, program level and student level?
There are currently, I believe we have 17 accountability measures in CTE. Most of those come from our Perkins, our federal legislation in the Perkins funding. And so we have what we call 8 core indicators, performance indicators that really drive what we do and that we are measured by, which some of those are what we're measuring or what we're reviewing right now from those graduation rate standards that we have to achieve.
So is there an accrediting body of all these certificates and all these programs? like we have for example, higher education or in public schools in some ways with accountability measures. What's the accountability measure beyond that? Is there an organization that examines that?
Some of the certifications, there are, when we look through our certifications, I mean, we report to the Department of Ed, so I'm not sure I have a good, clean answer for you. I'm not sure, Patrick or Beth, if you have a...
Yeah, go ahead, Beth.
Well, I was going to say another element of accountability is that each one of those programs has a group of industry partners that it's responsible to that help inform the curriculum. So that's the hope. I think both Patrick or Alan could speak to you of, say, their automotive program and what dealerships or auto companies partner with them and inform their curriculum. Secondly, a lot of those programs are dual credited, so you also have that outside check with a Vincennes or an Ivy Tech who is also informing some of the assessments that are put in place in those programs, and they too get input from the real world, from industry. So
Let me ask the question a different way. Is there an external agency from those participants who accredit it in some kind of way? People who are not partnering in it or providing input. I'm not recommending this, I'm just asking.
It's all done through the Department of Education. They have a reporting system called INTERS that tracks, it's also used for adult education, but it tracks every enrollment and tracks outcomes for students over the course of the year. And Beth is absolutely correct. All of the programs are guided by advisory committees, State Department of Education standards. Most programs, like all of ours, I believe maybe all of Allen's as well, are dual credit. So we have several different parties who are involved in ensuring the authenticity of instruction. I hope that later on we'll have a little more time to talk about certifications, which ones are recognized and which ones aren't, because I think moving forward that'll be a big topic of discussion.
Patrick, can you speak a little bit more about what are the outcomes that that system tracks?
Sure. ECA pass rates, work-based learning experiences, dual credits earned, concentrator status, which are all things that are financially incentivized by the state for us to be successful in those areas. On-time graduation rate, there are several. Sure, we'd be happy to provide those.
Do you look at outcomes post-high school graduation?
We do. Yeah, graduation follow-up is key, and thankfully the state has made it much easier in that they're able to now do much of that work for us, and then whatever students they can't find in terms of their post-secondary performance, we as local districts track students.
So you track in terms of whether they're employed, whether they're in some sort of post-secondary training program?
Yes, sir, and then we report back to the state.
I would just request through the chair that we get a copy of those accountability measures for programs, for certificates, for students. I think it's really important to share those, because we're going to have to create some kind of an accountability system to be sure students are receiving a rigorous education, and they might already be there, and that would make me really happy, but I haven't seen them yet.
Consider that done. And Representative Baining, you had also, just to, because I'm getting messages, the crowd is having trouble hearing in some cases, particularly you, Alan. So if you could get a little closer, because they want to hear what you have to say, okay? So let's make sure that we're close to the microphone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And my question may have been somewhat answered. I kind of would follow up on Jason's comment in terms of outcomes and making sure that we are measuring those in a critical way. I recently was at a program where we heard from Switzerland and how they do their programming, and it is a little different in the fact that it sounds to me like some of your programs are more industry driven, and what they do is they obviously have a very robust CTE program, much more than the United States, but they embed standards. They have a standard set of standards, which may be what you were talking about earlier, that all of their apprenticeship programs have to contain. So it's not industry driving it, it's the Ministry of Education says these are the minimum standards where you would find those Algebra 1, Algebra 2 competencies embedded in an apprenticeship program that then at some point in time would have certification that would be national certification. So can you share with me, do we have that kind of competencies built into it? And like I said, I'd have a much higher comfort level if I knew it wasn't just, some, I mean, business is very, very important, and making sure that these students are employable is important, but I think we need to make sure we have both of those things checked off.
Yes, sir. There are, has certainly been work done looking at the quantitative reasoning courses, what classes like, for example, precision machining with its embedded trigonometry might be able to count for a math credit, but across the board, there's not a requirement that a certain set of Algebra 2 standards would be embedded in every course.
So I assume that that'd be something as we move to maybe looking at these grad pathways that we're going to have to be very specific about making sure that those things are embedded. If we believe that a certain standard of math proficiency is going to be necessary to be successful in life, we need to make sure we have those embedded, which is kind of what they do in Switzerland. I mean, it's kind of the model.
So I personally hugely value cross-curricular instruction, so very strongly encourage my CTE instructors to work with partnering instructors in the high school where it makes sense to do so. Definitely in the entire student experience, we would want to make sure that those proficiencies are met. So if it's not documented through their CTE performance, I would think we would want to make sure that throughout their school day and their high school experience, those proficiencies were met.
If I could, just for 1 second here, just, you guys know I run a different style meeting, but Carol Oslander, I know you have to leave at 10 o'clock. It was a situation before we ever scheduled these. I am really big on, don't like for people just to sneak out of meetings, because I value every person's thoughts and so forth. And I told her I was going to do this, and the other person that has to leave early today, I've said they have to do this too. I'd like to hear just any thoughts that you have in leaving. We've always ended our meetings with values moving forward that you've gotten. The floor is yours for a moment for thoughts. However you'd like to do that, Carol.
I appreciated all the public comments that were given today. I feel like we're starting to stray a little bit off talking about graduation rates and diploma types. I'd like to make sure that we stick to task with what this task force is supposed to do. I think, again, I welcome everybody's thoughts and inputs, but I want to make sure that we are focusing on what we've been asked to do by the legislature, who's represented here today. That's where I want the focus. Again, my thoughts on the 30,000 foot levels, I want to make sure that we maintain rigor. I think flexibility is important. However, I think that we need to make sure that whatever we do for students is student centered, and make sure that whatever they graduate with, it provides them the currency to go on into college and career, or then college and then career. So just kind of, again, very 30,000 thoughts, but thank you, and I apologize again.
Not a problem. Thank you very much.
I think the report they alluded to earlier that talks about when they track those kids post-graduation, I would love to have that side by side with the courses that when we look at the embedded math, I would love to have that laying beside where we're going to say the embedded math is, to see which courses those students took, and yes, they're being successful, they're continuing their success, and which courses they took, and those students that have struggled to either maintain or keep a position. I think those two are tied closely together. So as we start to lay out those standards that we want, that we know are embedded, let's have proof in the pudding that yes, the math is embedded there, and here's our proof of the fact that these students are maintaining their jobs and getting promoted and those types of things. I think those two have to be closely linked.
I'm being told we can do that, so we will have that as well.
Awesome. I was looking at Alan as I was doing it. Not that I'm dumping it on you, but that was...
I was looking over here to the person that I'm always saying we're going to do something, and then she's like, just so you know, we can do that since you said it. Yes, Hardy.
So along the lines of this kind of comparative analysis, I would be curious in terms of some kind of analysis that showed us what the students look like compared to other students before they enter the CTA pathway, what they look like at entry, what they look like in comparison during the program, and as I've said, what they look like before. Some of the information in the report was very informative when we talked about who needs remediation and who does not once they actually enroll in college. But I'm curious because it would help us to understand the decision-making process that students undergo with their counselors and others when they decide to enter into the CTA pathway. So I think that's really important. There's a point of entry where students make a decision, interacting with other adults who are having an influence of their choices in terms of their coursework. I would like to know what they look like compared to the students that don't choose
Fire, if I can make one more point.
Yep, go right ahead.
In conversation with Patrick here, I want to just say this for the record. I think we need to understand that these, as I look at these graduation rates and compare them to the state's rates, it's impressive. And I think it's important to understand that in most cases, these CTE programs have empty seats. So these aren't cherry-picked kids. We're not turning away the kids that aren't going to do well. It is, these kids are focused, and I'm trying to think of the word Steve used in the last time that we spoke, relevant. It's, the stuff they're doing is relevant to them. And I think that's what brings about that focus. So these numbers are in some cases 8-10% higher. And I think that is completely due to the fact that it is what they're doing is relevant to them.
Yes.
As you're looking for data, as we're looking for data too, can you compile, as BJ talks about the number of empty seats, can you get us some data as to what kind of capacity we have around the state in terms of some of the programs? I mean, I hear of great programs, even Prosser, I guess, has some empty seats. And so number one, what kind of space we have available? And then overall, what percentage of students are graduating with CTE? I mean, going back to Switzerland, for instance, 70+% of their kids are in CTE programs. In our country, it's only somewhere between 6 to 8%. So if you could get that on an annual basis, that would be great too.
Sure. DWD and DOE both provide very good data to us.
Anybody else any discussion on that? Alan, do you have other points that you want to make to that?
Very quick points would be last couple, the very back was individual regional data, but 14, sort of 8, 14, 15 really completes the report, but it has some placement data. So we're talking about placement, so you can take a look at some of the placement data. And I bring that up because one point that is important to know is when we report our placement data, it's the second quarter after the students graduate. So it is a very accurate, very real number. It's not the students what they tell us they're going to do, it's what they are involved in at that time, second quarter after they graduate. And then the last report is, again, I think a nice piece of data that shows the post-secondary remediation rate of CTE concentrators versus the remainder of students that are not involved in CTE at that level, which is historically much, much lower the remediation needed for the CTE concentrator. So down around 7% versus 18% most recently.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else, any discussion around this report?
I feel like we need to designate a research assistant for Alan for all the data questions we're asking, but do you dig in on employment numbers, like what that looks like? Are these living wage jobs, or are these just
No, we're provided information by region that disaggregates it by related employment, related post-secondary, unrelated post-secondary, where the students at. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, just trying to get a sense of whether we're talking about gainful employment or just employment in general in terms of, I'm thinking about the post-high school outcomes. Are they
Yeah, I'm not certain if it's, I think employment would be employment, if they're employed through the Department of Labor where they harvest the data. And then the telling piece of data would be if it's in a related field or an unrelated field. But I think that data that we're looking at is all combined. It's not exactly related to unrelated.
The breakdown is related.
Right. We have that today. It's not in that chart.
And Alan, I would say that I don't know that I have this latitude, but that's never stopped me before. You and Alicia and we can work through what data we need to get. We're not going to leave you out there hanging on that, since you kind of have a day job that probably, but these are all good. This was really great, though. We do need to look at this.
They're great questions, and I think most all of that data is very accessible.
Cool.
Well, and I would agree with Jason's comment, although we couldn't hear you very well because you weren't close to your microphone. We were all over here. Are we missing something? It would be great to find out, what those jobs are, because, are they food service flipping hamburgers, or are they something that's meaningful that aligned with, and maybe their certification was in food service, which I sometimes question whether we should invest a lot of money in. But anyway, if it was, it would be great if we can find that alignment. I would think workforce development might have some of all that information available, not Department of Labor. So
I've been trying to keep a list of all the...
Yeah, you used to be the one that's got all the work to do, not Alan. So and that is your day job.
The data really has greatly improved the past year or two, so I think we'll have good information.
Great. Thank you. Anything else? Okay, then let's go to the broader scope then. We've got, again, this is School Leadership Day, principals, superintendents, other school leaders in leadership positions, and I would just open with the broad thought of what are our innovative, what are our thoughts on what these graduation pathways, potential ways of helping set our students up for success? What are those? Let's just begin.
And Byron, I think this kind of goes on that discussion you want to have right now. But my question to Patrick, or even to Alan, or anyone else around the table, I was intrigued by what Patrick said, that he's bothered by the vocational students in the program who are pulled out to go back to the high school for remediation. And I would just, and that's bothersome to me as an educator, and I would just like to hear from others, what is that solution? Is that a practice that we need to continue? Or is there something that's in the better interest of the students who have this passion to learn this skill, but we pull them away from it?
Thanks. The lights are coming on.
Yeah, before I'd invest a lot of time, because I would kind of go back to what Carol was saying. I hope that this panel will spend time not dwelling on what has happened in the past, because of I learned, ECAs are not a pathway today, so they're not necessarily mandated. So rather than dwell in the past, let's think of positive things for the future. So can we find these CTE pathways where we embed those things so they don't have to go back? So I guess I don't want to spend a lot of time, and maybe I'm the only one on the panel, but I really want to spend time on looking and hearing from these people in terms of what kind of viable alternatives are there in terms of CTE career pathways that we could look at that would be benchmarks for as grad pathways, and then what are the impediments to offering some of those? Because I've met with some of you around the table, and I know that that could be a problem in some of your more rural schools. I know remediation's been a problem, but I hope that was one of the intentions of moving this direction, so we're not constantly pulling them out to remediate. So I'd rather not spend a lot of time on that.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Representative Bain, did I just hear you said ECAs are not a pathway? Is that
at this point in time? If and I know you were in the audience last week, but as last time, if you read the statute, it is up to this panel, actually state board, to determine what those pathways will be. ECAs are required for federal accountability. I assume that we will probably make them a pathway, but the intent was, and Senator Cruz can chime in as well, I know the legislature wanted to get out of this repeating courses and pulling students out just for the purpose of remediation. That's why we put these multiple pathway opportunities in place. So I think it's the intent for us not to dwell on ECAs and, what's going to happen. And I hope that will be, there's definitely, this panel should be recommending to State Board what they anticipate pathways to be, and I'd assume that ECAs will be. But in current law, there is no definition that ECAs are the pathway. It is totally up to this panel. And then, like I said, the intent would be to allow more time to get into the CTE without having to have this remediation problem that has occurred over time.
With me, when we look at ECAs, and I would prefer to keep ECAs as a pathway, I think what we have to look at is, let's look at those students that passed the second time taking the test. And let's look at where they were on the original test. And those students that are 60 points away, that 5% of them passing, maybe we don't even give them the option of retaking the test. They need to choose a different pathway. But those students that are close, within 5, 6, 7, 10 points of it, if there's a 90% pass rate on that second test, we allow them to retake the test. But I think there's got to be some, I don't want to call it a cut score, but there's got to be some kind of a baseline to where if you're not within X amount of points, and we will have that figure because we'll know which students have passed in the past. We've got to limit those students, and I think that would limit remediation, and two, it would force those students to choose a different pathway because they're going to take this test and fail it a second time and a third time and a fourth time because history repeats itself. Let's not push that on those students. Let's say, okay, the students that are within X amount of points have proven, history says they will pass it on the second take. So we can remediate those students, but the other students, we need to look at alternatives.
Chris Lagoni, Indiana Small and Rural Schools Association. I love the conversation. I wanted to give some input on workplace placements, internships for small and rural schools. I surveyed my membership, and it was a very diverse response. Had some very creative ideas up by Goshen. Fairfield schools are doing some online things where they require students to take a couple online classes to free up their schedule so that they had the opportunity to be in an internship or workplace experience. I thought that was a creative example. Talked to a superintendent in Newton County who was quite honest, had some great placements, but employment opportunities not near a large metropolitan area limited the number of experiences they could provide. So if we were going to talk about a large percentage or some sort of workplace option, I think we'd want to provide some resources for schools. Transportation to CTE programs is difficult. Small and rural are not always near a large vocational center. They are cooperating between schools that might be 25 miles away. There are a lot of students who would like to access programming, but their families cannot provide the transportation. Small to medium-sized school probably could offer program completion for 4 or 5 different program completers. So we use the term pathway. Old high school administrator, I think of pathway as a 4-year pathway plan for program completion. I'm going to get my welding certificate. Here's my pathway plan for that welding certificate. I spent the summer interviewing counselors, and in the popular programs like welding, I heard from some counselors says, well, there's only so many spots, and we are going to make sure the students who can earn a dual credit are going to get those spots. So there may be some students out there who could benefit from a welding program. They're not going to qualify for the dual credit, so they're not getting access. So kind of back to some of our issues of, do we want kids in programs, or do we only want kids who are going to earn dual credits in programs with available spots? So I think studying the amount of spots open is a great concept. Excited about the ideas I heard. I think that it's also regional a little bit. Sometimes there's a tendency, if something works in one part of the state and kids could earn a workplace certificate, sometimes we look down at the program placement that school is able to innovate. It might be important to their community and it might fit a local need, but we sometimes don't like that. Well, that's not serving a need. Well, that's the program they could innovate in that area of the state, and it's providing, if we can put together some metrics and some certification, and I think work ethic's a great place to go with that. Just wanted to share those thoughts and enjoy the conversation.
Thank you. Todd.
Thank you, everybody. Todd Best, Executive Director with IASP. And we do see this legislation and now pathway discussion as a win-win opportunity for our kids. Should the ECA be one of those pathways for being diploma eligible, then we would support that. That creates door opening opportunities. I think the discussion really at the high school principal level becomes that your pathway is this honors diploma. And perhaps your pathway is this Core 40 diploma, just understanding where the student rests in their academic abilities. To BJ's point, and I forget who made the other point too about remediation and pulling kids out. Right now, our opportunity is remediation and retest. But if our opportunities become succeed on the ECA and move forward, and if you're not successful on that first attempt, here's the way we're going to help you get to be diploma eligible, that's a much greater conversation with kids than testing. I think back to one of the students that made a comment, in fact, I think they sat about in this area and said, isn't it much better for us to be learning the content in our context than just retesting and things? So that's why I see these pathways as a great opportunity. The online option, whether that is creating flexibility in the schedule, is a nice idea. Representative Boehne, yes, let's move forward. We talk a lot about employability skills, and that's been a great conversation around this table. We can attain those in lots and lots of ways. And what if there's a process by which students can demonstrate those employability skills in an online environment that does continue to create flexibility? Maybe it's by virtue of their CTE work. Maybe it's by virtue of the fact that they work hard before school and after school because they want to be diploma eligible, and they're still working through their math, English, science, social studies credits, because we have to remember they still have to earn those required number of credits per their diploma. So again, some win-win opportunities here for our kids, and looking forward to being flexible and creative around the process.
Jody French from Perry Central, and I just want to say that I really agree with Mr. Best. We are a very small rural school. We're basically an hour from anywhere, right in the middle of the Hoosier National Forest, and we feel like we are a very innovative school. We have 60% of our students in internships. We do full-day internships because of the transportation situation. We have students that are utilizing online so that we can create that flexibility. And so sometimes we look at what seems to be barriers, and we've been able to find ways around that. We have invested a lot of time working with our community leaders to try to pull the community together so that we can have those internships. We've had industry that, shut the door in our face several times, but by continuing to go back and continuing to talk to them about those success stories, we've been able to get that done. And so when I think about the time, and I'm an ag teacher too, and so when I think about the time that we spend, right now I'm working on a remediation plan, and we do not pull students for remediation. Their vocational classes are first. We figure it out. We have a after-school program. They have a study hall. We figured that out. We'll put in the extra time to get that done. But it's just really important that that remediation plan, all that time we're spending, when we could really be spending it on helping kids to earn a certification or helping them to do something that's going to be more meaningful than the test.
Jody, what do internships look like at your school?
We have a large variety. We have several students that go to WPACA, Foundry, ATTC, advanced manufacturing, about 20% are in advanced manufacturing. We started a Commodore manufacturing program where it's a student-ran manufacturing facility, and then now they're going to be transferring into industry doing those same types of experiences. We have students in the hospital. We have students, we have a student that drives to about an hour every day to Jasper, working with an HR person. We have computer science. it's the wide gamut.
So if you were to give the top 3 things that you think have to be in, because you have a variety of business and industry that they're working in, and you can expand this if you want to, but I didn't want to put you on the spot. What would be the 3 things that if you were going to say we were going to allow internships as a pathway, right? What are the things that everyone would have to have?
In terms of being like to check off the box?
Yeah, the part that means that if you're doing it at Perry Central or you're doing it at Lebanon, that they're both meeting the same standards.
I would say that I feel like our most meaningful internships, our students are part of a pathway. They've had some experiences prior to that. They've had some job shadowing experiences. They've had some experience, and they kind of know the type of work that they're going to be able to, that they're going to see. I think that that's really important. I think that they have to understand the professional skills. We have the work ethic certification, but we really focus on that their junior year so that they can use it when they go out to their internship, ideally. I think they have to understand that. Those are probably the 2 biggest. And they have to do well. They have to want to work hard, and but I've seen the internship really save students, and they get really excited about school again.
Are you doing the state's work ethic certification?
We are.
How do you do that in your world?
We partner with Junior Achievement, so our students right now get a little bit of direct instruction using the Junior Achievement program, and then we try to do the attendance policy, the piece, and all the pieces that are part of that. Right now, what we're doing, and we have about 20% of our class that's earning the certification, but we want to go out and reach out and get those tougher students, especially, and attendance is usually the biggest issue. And so we're working on ways that we can get with those kids and provide that meaningful support to help them to get to school and make good decisions about when's, this is not a good time to meet. And sometimes I think that, especially kids in poverty situations, they can't problem solve an issue. And so their car breaks down, so they just don't come to school, or just different things that happen. And so if we can get with them and help them to learn how to problem solve those things, then they're going to be better in the workforce too. So that's basically, we just follow what's in that certification.
Thank you. If I can just add to the work-based learning, I think one thing that is incredibly important if we're going to recognize work-based learning as a pathway is that we develop a portfolio requirement around that work-based learning experience. Right now, our students have defined work-based learning skills. There are standards that are set up under the work-based learning umbrella. They also have standards for the related pathway. So for each student, a cooperative education supervisor, in addition to the student's parent and their employer, will develop a training plan for each student. And as they work throughout the year, they'll document their learning experiences. That is absolutely crucial because it shows that there's strategic intent with every action that the student takes, rather than just a release time from school that we can't really hold anyone accountable with.
Steve, I think you were up, and then I'll go to Representative Binion.
Thank you, Dr. Ernst, for having us here today, and thank you for asking those questions. Those are the same questions that I've been asking my principal colleagues, students, and parents. So I want to try to capture what Carol said when she left and what others said. Maybe if we stay focused on, let's get down to some maybe ideas. So I just would like to present some bullet points, what I've been thinking. I've watched your other meetings I've not been able to attend. So I guess I just want to answer some of those questions, like what would a pathway look like? When we talk about flexibility, what does that mean? I think from a principal standpoint and a student standpoint, I don't think it has to mean the same thing. In other words, I think one pathway can be one thing and you're done. In Steve Baker's world, in my opinion, if you meet the ECA with the rigor that goes with that fulfills a pathway. Done. You don't have to add more to it. Now, I want to also clear up a misperception. Principals never say to a student, you passed your ECA, congratulations, you're done. It's really the beginning. Now we say, now that that's done, now we're going to fly. So it's just a beginning, not an end. So But if you add options, more options to the ECA, it could become a barrier and not more options. So I think an ECA by itself could be a pathway. I think academic honors, we haven't really talked about that much, but that might be a pathway. That's just thinking outside the box. It has the foreign language component. It has the AP dual credit component. It has several of the things that we talk about around here that of importance. And I think I never want to misquote Jason, but I think he said it when I was listening to the meeting, they have a 1 or 2% remediation in college, academic honors diploma students. Is that close, a 1% or 2%? 2-3%. So in other words, so we've solved the remediation problem, 3%, thank you. So we've solved that problem as well. So maybe an academic honors would be a career pathway, and it could be by itself. But I think other things would not do well by themselves, like a work ethic certificate. I love that idea. I don't know if that's enough by itself. So when we say flexibility, I think that means some pathways can be single and some can be combinations. I really don't like the word stackable. I don't like the word point system, because when we get into Ohio and we start talking about that situation. But I think we can look at creative solutions through that way. I did talk to my students. Let's just put them in a group called at-risk students. And I asked them the things that we're asking around this table, and I appreciate Dr. Butts for bringing students to the panel. Here are the 2 words that I summarized from what I heard. 2 words, obtainable and relevant. And we've used some of those words here today. But they don't want things that are done to them. They really want things that are done for them. And if it's going to become a checklist of, I've got to do this, even though I have no interest in it, then in my opinion, that becomes a barrier. But if it's something that's done for them and they see the relevance in it, then this can become an option that helps them to graduation. So as I start looking at those another one, sorry, I just saw my notes. I think ASVAB and military could be another pathway, possibly unto itself, industrial certification by itself. So when we start talking flexibility and pathways, I would just, I guess, encourage the panel. I don't think it has to be all or nothing. I think it can be both. And speaking of all or nothing, I wholeheartedly agree with Representative Baining and Patrick about ECAs and remediation. That is the past. And we have pathways now, it's just one. It's called ECAs or ISTEP. Moving forward, they can play together very, very nicely. As a high school principal, we can make both happen. We can live in both worlds, and we can combine them into one world. Thank you. Sorry, that's a lot thrown out there, but just a lot of bullet points.
Sure. I appreciate your bullet points, Steve. Thank you. I also agree with your work. Ethics certificate to me is not enough to be a pathway. Going back to Patrick and maybe to Alan, one thing I do believe that as we look at CTE, that and you bring up a very interesting concept I think we need to drive down deeper in, and maybe if you could provide some context at a future meeting, but portfolios I think could provide a perfect way to have some sort of accountability on the outcomes of it. So if in terms of, I guess my question would be, how would those be developed? How are you going to embed the rigor to make sure that they have mastered the content? And then, who's going to do the evaluation of it? So if you and Alan, maybe if you're prepared to answer that now, but I would be very interested in.
I'm probably not prepared to offer you everything to answer your questions, but I will tell you that Department of Education has very kindly created guidelines that need to be followed when developing a work-based learning plan. So we model everything off of that. My biggest concern in imagining the ideal world is that we don't have enough manpower. Our staff are so lean in our schools that we're not able to do that effectively when a co-op supervisor has more than 40 or 50 students to track. So if you're in a high school that happens to have 1,000 people per grade, it becomes a difficult conversation about how we're going to manage that. But we're all brainstorming across the state on how we can better serve our students and provide them more relevant real-world work-based learning opportunities.
You might also look at some states, I think Maine, there's a couple of states on the East Coast that are actually doing portfolios, and I think sometimes too, to make sure that accountability is built in, it'd be interesting to see who does the evaluation of the portfolio. Generally, I would assume that you'd want somebody who didn't necessarily have a personal stake in that student's success. So if you had a rubric that was developed, you could have a third-party evaluator do the portfolio evaluation as opposed to having that CTE director be responsible
That's
for that.
an interesting thought. At this point, we have a licensed co-op coordinator who does have a very vested interest in the success of students, and that's been really beneficial because that person is willing to make the additional phone calls to employers and parents and others to kind of rally support around that kid so that they're getting the supports they need. But you raise a very interesting point. You know, if we could have somebody at least spot check portfolios for each location to make sure that the documentation that's there is something that's of value and that it's done properly according to state standards. Certainly an interesting concept.
As I've listened to in the last 3 meetings, our first meeting were business and college, higher ed collaborators, and I think our second meeting included the students and the advocates, and the third one then teachers and counselors. One thing that I keep thinking about when I think about our children, it's been mentioned several times as well, that our ninth graders are going in. I want to piggyback off of what Chris said. Our ninth graders are coming in, and we've already developed for them a 4-year plan in the 8th grade. Many times we begin that work in the 6th and 7th grade, but we finalize it in the 8th grade as they start to enter into the 9th grade. But many of our students don't know what they're going to want to do or where they're going to be 4 years later. That maturity process from 14 to 18 is phenomenal. And as they have experiences going through school, they have the opportunity to become familiar with so many new things, and they're exposed to so many new things as they're going through different opportunities that they have, academic, extracurricular, throughout their high school experience. And one of the challenges, I think, for the panel as the recommendations started to come forth, and I think that's why, and I know to Carol's point, to try to state that 30,000 view and not talk about ECA as a pathway or not talk about diploma types, but they're hard to decouple when we're thinking about a student being focused on what that looks like 4 years from now when they walk across the stage with options, whether they're career-minded, military-minded, or college, post-secondary minded. And so as I think about the flexibility piece, I think about how do we make sure that these pathways have enough flexibility that a student can jump lanes. So if they're on that ECA pathway, let's say, they're very successful as an 8th grader, they get to high school, they realize, I've just hit my rigor, the level of rigor that's really challenging for me. I may need to look at a different pathway in order for me to be successful 4 years from now, and they're able to switch lanes. And I mentioned this before, and I don't remember if it was in public comment or otherwise, but a conversation I had with my mother about pathways that used to exist when she was in high school, and how from year to year there would be individuals that she was friends with, that she was sitting next to in class, that the next year they were gone because they had slipped out of that pathway into a different pathway and were never to be seen again because they didn't meet that requirement to continue on that college pathway, which is the pathway that my mother was on. And I'd like to hear, and I'm sorry to put Jason to point or to ask him to make a direct comment without warning, but as we think about these students who are on a career pathway, and if we designate that as a career pathway, what does that do to their options when they graduate? And I mean, it's because I think it's a valid pathway, but I know that we have students in CTE right now that are in a CTE college or a career pathway with intent to go to college. That career pathway isn't for them to go directly into the career. Now they could, because they're going to come out with the skills that they have earned and that would allow them to be very employable in a high wage, high demand job. But they have a desire to go on to something post-secondary, 2 or 4 year program. When we talk about entrance into college, do we inhibit our students based on what we may call this, and I know that nothing's been created, but what we may call these credentials, these pathways, by the time they get to the end? College pathway, career pathway, military pathway. What does that do? Because that's important when we start thinking about our college admissions processes for those students who are wanting to have those options at the end of those 4 years.
What was the question?
So as you think about the admissions process at the colleges and universities, in what we call these pathways, what does it do to a student's ability to enter college after they graduate? Do we inhibit them if we call them certain things, or if we have limitations based on the pathways that we've created?
Sure. Well,
Or that you've created? I'm not creating them, obviously. I'm a collaborator.
I think you have a voice in the process. Am I talking loud enough this time for the meeting? I'll say a couple things. One, this word flexibility has come up numerous times at every single meeting. And I think flexibility is important, both for the students and for the school, as long as it's tied to the right outcome. And I think what we're reconciling ourselves to the fact to now is that a graduation rate in and of itself and a test score in and of itself aren't the right outcome. Or at least they're not an outcome that's highly correlated with the student being successful post-high school. The other thing I'll say is I think there's been a tendency in these meetings to equate a pathway with which test a student takes. And I would argue that a test in and of itself isn't a pathway. With respect to the end-of-course assessments, reflecting back to the very first meeting we heard from business and higher ed, I think what we heard from them is that an ECA is an indicator, it's a checkpoint, but in and of itself, it doesn't provide the student any post-high school currency. Colleges, and they're here in the room today, I know, they don't look at a student's ECA test score in terms of their admissions decisions. And employers, I've not heard an employer yet that says that they look at the end-of-course assessment in and of itself as an indicator for employment. And so I guess I would just caution against us viewing any single test in and of itself as a pathway. Now, if you pair the right test, we can have a long conversation, maybe not today, about what is the right test with the right expectations and experience for a student. I think those are building blocks of a pathway. But to equate a pathway to a single test, I think would be taking us down the wrong course. The other thing I would say to the flexibility and the students need to change lanes and so forth, I think that is absolutely true. But I think we have a tendency sometimes to overcorrect. You know, we're so adverse to tracking that we haven't provided as much structure to students as they would benefit. I mean, we don't ever want to be Germany where you take a test and that decides exactly what courses are available to you, but we shouldn't veer so far the other way that there's a strong likelihood that a student leaves high school with little to no idea of what opportunities await them post-high school. And I think there's an opportunity here. We're talking about these things in different ways. I think there's an opportunity here to find a meaningful middle ground where we're not asking students to make hard choices between academic coursework, technical coursework. We're not asking them to make hard decisions between post-secondary or non-post-secondary, but there are building blocks towards all those things. And I would just urge us to be thinking about what are the right outcomes for students, and do we feel confident today that 40 credits combined with an ECA test score in and of themselves are equipping all of our students to be successful? And as a practical matter, you're absolutely right, these are young developing minds. We don't want to box them in, but we also don't want to lead them into high school with very little to no idea, because the reality is by the time they turn 17 or 18, they're going to have to start making some hard choices about what that next step is. And I'm trying to reconcile in my own head, is the current system set up to make sure that the vast majority of those students have a meaningful post-high school step? And I don't know, at least this is my own conclusion, that we can say that today. I'm hopeful that the result, one of the outcomes of this group and its recommendation to State Board will get us a little closer on that path. I don't know if I answered your question, but at least got some things on my chest.
One thing is, I'm listening, I keep rereading the new system to see if a student is ready to graduate, and I would just caution as we create something, I know we always want to have that rigor and accountability, if we could provide an experience for a student in his or her senior year to go get an internship at an HVAC employer, and at the end, the student would have an option if they could take the HVAC assessment that exists for CTE. Well, number one, that would benefit the student because it would document that they're career ready. I think a principal would say, gee, that'd be great for the kid, but I would caution, let's also not then turn around and say, well, let's hold the school accountable for that because the student hasn't been a completer. That high school may not be a completer, does not have a program for that. It may have been a 3 years of preparation, and the senior year the student qualified. So the principal would say, I want to do what's good for this kid. Let's not also build a system that says, okay, we're going to hold you accountable for that industry certification. So I've got a list of like 6 pages of the industry certifications, and there's no way every school can be a completer for all the internship opportunities that could happen. But you do want to offer that kid the opportunity to, hey, if they pick it up, workplace experience, and they can pass the certification, it's great for that student. But let's not turn around and create a system that dings the school for a program they don't support. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I just wanted to make a comment that he asked about work, like if you had a work pathway. And I guess for me, when I look at a student, I kind of already know. But a lot of times we tell the kids to aim high, and then just see how it all falls. And 9 times out of 10, most of them will achieve have higher achievement than what you expected. And so, but if the focus is more on the skills that you need instead of on the pathway, if I'm going to get into the automotive industry, what kind of skills do I need to be successful in that? And then there's different various levels of those types of skills. And so really it's just how you present that to the student, I think.
Liz?
Good morning. I'm Liz Walters. I'm principal of Beech Grove High School. Thank you for having us today. I just want to echo what Dr. Best said, and that we are really excited about the possibilities that this will give our students and the conversations that we often are already having with these students. In terms of the past ECA, current ISTEP, and future ECA, I do just want to respond, not from the bird's eye view, but from the ground level perspective. We don't really have any data to suggest the correlation between students' performance on the current ISTEP and how they will perform in college. I will tell you, in my building, these students are already on the academic honors diploma track. So I think when we navigate how a pathway is for students after high school decisions and how a pathway qualifies them for the GQE, a pathway for the ECA and current ISTEP could certainly qualify them in addition to the academic honors diploma, because those are the kids that are passing it now. I'm really excited about the conversation about all of these opportunities. Beech Grove is very fortunate. We have significant personnel and resource allocation for lots of programs. We partner with C9, we host JAG, we have CTE at the local level, we have our School to Career and ICE program with a portfolio component that is locally developed by guidance from the state. We developed a graduation experience because Beech Grove is on a Block 8. Our students have 64 opportunities to earn credits. I didn't want to graduate kids at the end of the sophomore year. So we mandate that they experience some graduation requirement. We have internship programs. We qualify them through dual credit AP. These conversations are already happening in the state in a lot of places. And I think that flexibility that we've talked about quite a bit, and students being able to move in and out to show the diversity and the skills that they have, it's really important, and I value that the panel is having this conversation, to recognize also that we are preparing students for careers that don't yet exist. So the conversations that we are already having at the building level, the counseling conversations, and I know you have a question coming up on those specific conversations. Those conversations are valuable at the building level. Piling on, putting those point systems, that accountability piece sometimes, unfortunately, removes our ability to have those robust conversations. So I would encourage that to be continued as part of the panel, and I greatly appreciate the work you're doing for our kids.
Yes, John.
Good morning. John Milliman from Washington Township Schools. Just inserting kind of a new take from our perspective. Over 13% of our student population, English is not their first language. We're one of about a half a dozen districts in the state that qualifies for refugee funds. So we have a lot of students that come to us, obviously, with a language barrier. So it's exciting for me to hear conversation about options that might apply to students other than ECA. I know that we've had in the past. Going back to Dr. Folk's comment about remediation time and the enormous amount of time those students take in test prep as well as remediation, oftentimes may be barriers to being able to take advantage advantage of some of the wonderful programs we've heard about around the table here. So I don't know what that looks like for those students. It's just exciting to have a conversation now about that. Actually, it's the first time this has even been a possibility. I don't know if it's a combination of course completion, academic improvement, academic achievement, industry certification, or some type of combination. But there is a unique subset, I think, of students that shouldn't get lost in this conversation. We have incredibly bright students where English is not their first language. The issue is English is barrier sometimes to passing an assessment where they have no context for the questions. Students write beautiful prose and beautiful essays and wonderful reflections, but when it comes to trying to answer questions on an assessment which have a cultural context, obviously they have difficulty in those moments. So if there's opportunities through this to be able to have flexibility for that and be able to honor those students' improvement, academic achievement, participation in things like CTE, that would be a wonderful thing for the students in that vote.
Go ahead, Todd.
Thank you. Hear the different experiences of internships or the graduation experience or the capstone and things. I guess I'd like to ask the question, and maybe it gets in a little bit to the portfolio concept and how we evaluate that, is what are the skills that we're hoping kids exhibit or take away from those external experiences? Because we hear from schools and corporations that have varying abilities to offer the internship, but they may have the ability to offer a capstone experience. It's a year-long experience with a certified teacher. That's a Wayne Township program in particular. They might do a senior project. Can those types of external experiences or culminating experiences qualify a kid for the skills that we're hoping they take away from the high school experience? So to Jason's point, making a better high school student no matter what diploma they happen to earn. So I'd like us to kind of sometimes capture what those skills look like, and then as we think about those pathway options, how do those fit together? I think a lot about the core 40 kids who, for them, testing is a struggle. And it might be those EL students in Washington Township or in Perry Township or in the Fort Wayne area. May just be those students who struggle in the test-taking world, and we can all identify who those might be. So I think a lot about if they finish that core 40 content and are successful in all those credit-earning classes, what else can then they exhibit? And it might be those external experiences. What if it were a successful completion of the 21st Century Scholar Track program and those 12 activities that are expected? Not necessarily academic content required in there, but they're taking the SAT, they're applying for college, they're applying for scholarships, they're doing all the things that we're hoping to incent as a state. I mentioned those capstone experiences as well. I heard somebody say the JAG program. And again, that's reinforcing all the particular skills that are there. So sometimes those standalone things, as some others have said, wouldn't be beneficial, wouldn't be enough to qualify. But earning that core 40 plus these other things, absent an ECA pass rate, I think could. And into the discussion about the third-party evaluation, I've got some thoughts around that, not for this particular panel, but would be glad to be involved in how that could come together and benefit both our workforce and our students.
Good morning. I'm Jill Barker. I am the CEO and Commandant at Anderson Preparatory Academy. I'll say APA because that's a mouthful. And as I look at this and I listen to this discussion, I'm a product of Indiana education. In high school, my class was the second class required to take the GQE to graduate. And I was an academic honors diploma track child. My question, and something that I think the panel should be looking at, I didn't make my decision on where I was going to go in my career in high school. I started in elementary. I started, think about small children. We ask them, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I think part of this is getting this panel to look at the pathways starting at a younger age. I knew at 7 years old I was going to Indiana State University and I was going to be an English teacher. And that was because the school that I went to focused on, helping you find your purpose, helping you find your career. And so as I went up through my school, through public school, I designed my own career path. I knew I needed to take every English class that was possibly available. And without that, I don't think I would have been as successful as where I ended up. And where I ended up was an English 10 teacher, so I got to spend a lot of time with ECA, a lot. And what I found were a lot of kids who hadn't found their purpose yet, and we're talking about sophomores and juniors in high school. When I entered college, I was told that college freshmen changed their major 3 times, and that was in 2001. I'd be curious what the statistic is on that now. As we look at these pathways, some of the flexibility, which I think is amazing, as a public charter school, flexibility is very important to us to be able to meet the needs of our students. But as we look at flexibility, sometimes that also brings limitations. Many have been brought up, including transportation. How many pathways are going to be established? Our school is military style, so all of my high school cadets are in the Air Force JROTC. If you want to talk soft skills and talk to the career and industry around us, our kids have soft skills. The collaboration, the respect, being able to go to a job interview and being able to work as a team, that's unique to us. Now, if I have a student that wants to go into agriculture, or I have a student who really wants to go into bioengineering or aeronautical engineering, the options that I can provide are online education. I can provide partnerships with local businesses, and I can provide partnerships with our local D26, which is our Career Tech Center. However, we can't meet all those needs, and I'm located in an urban area. And my question, as we continue to look at those and look at these options, how do we keep a broad scope and keep local control and flexibility, but how do we overcome those barriers that are going to impede the success of our students? And so basically, that's my question for everybody is, how old were you when you were first asked, what did you want to be when you grew up? Did they laugh at you? Or did they start helping you find out if that was the right pathway for you? So, thank you.
My name is Hardy Murphy, and I'm with the Indiana Urban Schools Association. And actually, Jill kind of touched upon a point that I was making earlier. That the earlier we start, the better that we are. That was the point about who students are, what they look like at the point of decision making and entry into whatever path they choose happens to be. At that point in time, I think we have some idea of where students might land. With our urban schools, we actually have challenges and opportunities that run across the board of student life experiences, students' community experiences. And we know that about the worst thing that can happen to a student as they matriculate through school is to not get a high school diploma. I know people talk about the fact that in today's world you need more than a high school diploma, but the fact of the matter is still, if you are a dropout and you do not complete high school, it attenuates your chances to lead successful, productive lives. It affects the way that you interact with your neighbors. It affects the way that you walk through your community, and it actually defines the kind of community that you help to create. So keeping it at the 30,000-foot level, our suggestion at IUSA is that we make sure that the pathways become opportunities, that we anticipate whether or not we're creating barriers, that as students leave school, we want them to be prepared to contribute, and that there are multiple ways to do that, and that a test score in and of itself does not indicate that you have had a high school education that prepares you to enter the world of work, to enter the world of society, to enter the world of citizenship. So as we move forward with this conversation, I really hope that we keep that 30,000-foot view and not make a mistake that upon reflection we'll see that we have cut our noses off to spite our face. At the end of the day, this is about the children now who are going to be the citizens in our communities. We want to give them the opportunities to acquire the skills and the knowledge to become productive citizens and successful individuals in our world.
Hold that thought a second, because I've got Representative Manning who needs to leave. Would you please give your thoughts at this time? I'm coming back to you, though.
Well, I'm pleased that we're continuing to talk about flexibility and looking at options. I like the portfolio idea. I would challenge, I will say, I brought up Switzerland a couple times, and I don't want to be like Germany necessarily in track, but there are several comments, even Jill's comment about knowing in elementary that she wanted. The Swiss model is real interesting because rather than use school counselors, which we had here, I think last meeting, they have gone to a system where they use career coaches, and they don't do them in the school. They actually do them outside the school in the local community because they're more connected with businesses and understand exactly what opportunities are out there and what's changing. And they start in middle school, which is kind of where you are. The other thing is that, talking to Superintendent Butt's question, the Swiss model also is very permeable. So it's one of those things you can start in a career tech field. And I think even with some of the information we got from Patrick and Alan today, you can see the success that some of these CTE students have, because if you have embedded into the CTE program the rigor and the content, that students would be able to be successful in any type of career track. I would challenge, I think there is actually a video as well as a PowerPoint that we've made available to Alicia regarding the Swiss model. They actually did a presentation for the National Conference of State Legislators 2 weeks ago, Friday, here in Indianapolis. And I would challenge the panel to maybe take a look at that, because I don't think we can take everything from it, but I think you'd find that they have actually done, like I said, 70+% of their kids graduate with a CTE track, as opposed to our country where it's about 92% are going with a career tech track. And they look at it as, which is something I hope that this will move towards, the kids look at career tech ed as a step up, not necessarily a dead end. And I think we heard, the last comment I would make is that from the second meeting, I think where we had the students, I recently had an opportunity to be in Batesville again, which one of the students was from Batesville. And the comment was, and I think this is something we need to focus on as a panel too, career tech ed does not mean remedial students. Unfortunately, so many of us think, well, if they can't make it in an academic, let's just stick them in career tech ed. And that is not what industry's asking for. I mean, Batesville, Hillenbrand Industries was like, hey, we want these people to be our leaders in our company, so don't think of it as remediation. Think of it as an opportunity. With that, I've got to catch a flight. Thanks.
Thank you. Hardy, I want to go out of respect, because I caused this, right? But I feel like everybody ought to have a right to bring some closure to themselves. Will you please reiterate your points again?
I remember what I said.
I wondered if you were able to.
Actually, I think the point is that what we're trying to do is prepare our students so they can lead productive lives that are meaningful and that give them an opportunity to derive some satisfaction and how they walk our pathways to our communities. And there are different ways to get there. I think the point that was made, that the representative made on the way out, was really a salient point. And that is that I don't think business industry is saying to us, we're talking about career and technical education being for those students that at the point of entry are demonstrating that they have not been successful. That's the point about what students look like when the choices are made. So when you make those choices, if every student out there has an opportunity to make the same choices as other students, then that's about preparing them along the way so that when they get a chance to make that decision, it is not a remedial decision. So what we're talking about here today has far-reaching implications, not just for 9 through 12, but for K through 12. And I think if we can build these pathways through the teaching and learning experiences that students have beginning in kindergarten, by the time they hit that 9th grade, when they're getting ready to make those decisions, it is a decision that's made based upon their interests and their capabilities, rather than a default decision because they have not been successful. So that's what I'm suggesting in terms of that 30,000-foot view. When we talk about embedding the standards in the rigor and the curriculum, there are multiple ways for students to demonstrate that they have met the standards and the requirements for different math courses, for different English courses. And I think that kind of thinking has to be embedded in these pathways as routes to acquiring the job skills and the capabilities that business and industry that they're looking for. When you look at what's happening on a global level now, people have in fact gotten beyond content and they're now into other kinds of skills. Do you communicate well? That means that you have in fact addressed the English language coursework effectively. They want to know if you can problem solve and if you can think quantitatively. One could argue that then you have demonstrated that you have mastered the mathematical requirements of the multiple pathways. So that's what I mean by the 30,000. What kind of people are we giving students an opportunity to become?
I'm Rebecca Doherty. I'm the principal at an early college. One of the things that and passionate urban educator, but one of the things that I was listening to you just speak about that I do want to comment to is I don't feel like we are necessarily building the pathways for our students. I feel like they're already there. I feel like we need to open the access to the students, so we need to open up the eyes and the opportunities for the students have all the way through, you know, elementary age and beyond. I have an early college opportunity, so I'm blessed to have the opportunity to take urban students that are at all different levels and take them through to earn an associate's degree by the time they graduate. And one of my students had an opportunity to speak here. Great opportunity. Thank you so much for that. So, you know, one of the things that, you know, and when we're talking about the ECA, that is an assessment that students are taking, and I agree 100% that there needs to be other opportunities for students to demonstrate, you know, all the skills and qualities that they need for college and career readiness, whatever pathway that they choose to go down by the time they graduate, and a single test is not going to be indicative of that. However, if you look at students who are going on to college and career pathways, again, we're connected to an assessment of some type. So I think that there is definitely some value added to having a student show proficiency at the end of a course, which is why I really promote end of course assessment. Another point that I wanted to make, been holding this up for a while, is that if we look at students with remediation and the amount of time that they're taking for those retesting opportunities, I can tell you at my school, we have 100% of our students graduate, 92% get an associate's degree, 80% get an academic and technical honors diploma. And I still have, you know, 100 plus students that I'm remediating on an ISTEP assessment in math, you know. So while that is a district focus, you know, you have to look at that, all of the things that these students are achieving and all the things that they go on to do beyond that point. But yet I'm pulling those students, and I am having to pull those students to create some remediation opportunities. And I don't even like to use the term remediation. I like to use the term acceleration, because that's really what we're doing with these kids. You know, we're taking them steps beyond where they are because they didn't make it there at that point. And I agree 100% that we need to build in the level of rigor at younger ages in order to make them ready so that we don't have to remediate them. We shouldn't have to create synthetic opportunities for them to be remediated. We should be doing that already in our own classroom. But I definitely want to say that I think all of the things that we're all here and we're sharing are pathways that are already in place. It's just what kind of model are we going to reflect to allow equal access to all of the students. And I am, again, an urban educator. However, we're surrounded by rural educators, and I experience that all the time. And so I am a big supporter of equal access opportunities because I'm blessed to be in a district where we do have those multiple pathways. We just have to make sure that we have flexible options for our students.
While Jill's question may have been rhetorical, I do want to respond, at least from a personal standpoint, that might also emphasize my my discussion or my point on flexibility. I wanted to be a long-haul truck driver well into my junior high years. Still do at some point. I'm not sure it'd be more or less stressful than my current job, but it's certainly one that seems like a lot of fun. In my junior high years and well into my high school years, I wanted to be in ag business. That was a career I wanted to pursue because of my family's long history in the farming industry. But it wasn't until my junior year when Tom Smith, my math teacher, really turned me on to becoming an educator. And I come from a family of educators. My father's 74, he's still teaching, he has 2 more years, at least that's what he's told his principal, before he retires. And so my uncle was a superintendent, et cetera. But it wasn't until Tom Smith, watching him teach math, small guy, basketball coach, kind of quirky, as some of those people that really inspire us are, developed for me that passion inside that said, I want to do what he does and what he has just done for me. And so having that opportunity, and I will tell you that I had growing up, I didn't know that college was not an option. I didn't know that people didn't go to college after they graduated from high school. That was never an option sitting around the dinner table in my home. But in conversations with many of our students, that is not a conversation that occurs at all. They don't know that they struggle to know that college is even an option until they have advocates, and Becky spoke to opening up those pathways for people. So that's where, and I think about some of the individuals that I had experiences with in college that changed majors multiple times. Now, granted, some of those took 5 and 6 years before they were able to graduate. And then the individuals that I know of that I lived with in college that changed careers after they got out because they thought they wanted to do something, but even well into their 20s and 30s decided that they wanted to do something different. And we have those experiences now with individuals coming into education who chose a different pathway graduating from college, but now have decided that they want to become teachers and are giving back, and they're phenomenal individuals. So I guess that's my perspective when I come to this, that we all at various points in our life have different things that happen. I'd love to run a tiki bar down in South Florida when they rebuild. That'd be a perfect retirement plan, but that's probably not going to give me the quality of life that I want. That's a reality but there's all those things that we still have passions about that I think if we continue to open the access to those pathways, we can really serve our students well.
I think part of what we've gotten away from is thinking of what the end product we're looking for is in our students. Who do we want them to be when they leave high school as productive citizens of Indiana or the country or the world? Because our pathways have to inform that. There has to kind of be this bare minimum of what we expect a productive citizen to be. So, and maybe it's a special educator, and when you write a goal, you start with the end in mind, and then you work backwards. So I feel like maybe we even need to talk a little bit about defining who that is.
Outcomes, right?
Yes, yeah. And then kind of to Jeff and Jill's point, I'm not here as a parent representative, but I do have a student in college and a student in high school, so it's a big part of who I am, as well as a high school educator. Personally, I grew up in a family in a cycle of poverty. I was a first-generation college student, but I married into a family that was very collegiately minded. My father-in-law was a college professor. My children didn't decide what they wanted. My junior still doesn't know what she wants to be when she grows up, except that she knows she wants to go to college. My older daughter wanted to be a veterinarian from the time she was in 2nd grade until her junior year in high school. And then suddenly she was all about the arts. She's now a film production major. But again, always knew college was in her path. But then I think about my students. And when all they have known is a cycle of poverty and they don't have voices speaking into their lives to show them the world, they look at college debt and they think, well, I know I have to pay my bills today, and if I have debt, I can't pay my bills today, so maybe college isn't an option for me. So I think part of our role as educators and in designing these pathways, and this is really broad and may not even be helpful, but it's what's on my mind, is showing kids all of those options so that they aren't tied to whatever their history is. You know, I have so many kids who just think, well, you know, I work at the A&P now, and so that's just where I'll stay, and it's okay, it pays the bills. I'm not really happy there, but I know I'm going to be able to eat. I know I'm going to keep the lights on. I know that I can take care of my family with this job. And if I go to college, I may get debt. I may not be able, they just don't know the security of that. So I think as educators, we really have to figure out a way that within these pathways, we're showing them all the options.
Did you have a reaction?
I do. And I will openly admit to being an anomaly. Most 7-year-olds aren't going to decide, you know, I think a lot of my friends who wanted to be princesses and gymnasts and all those things too. But as we look at the flexibility going from different pathways, what concerns me as they technically, I guess if I'm going to say they change majors while they're in high school, how are those pathways going to be linked together so that when I go here, I want to be an English major, and then all of a sudden I decide, oh, I need to go into a scientific field. How do I move into that pathway without losing traction and forward motion? And then also, as we look at making equal access to everyone, having equity in that process, looking at virtual reality, looking at digital learning, looking at online education, and bringing all those components together, there also still needs to be an actual reality piece of this component, whether it's a portfolio, whether it's the internship, whether it's the work-based learning experience, because until someone actually gets to do exploratory learning and tries it out, you know, that's where I'm seeing my graduates go, where they had decided this is my path, and they go and they get into those college classes and they go to their first practicum or something like that, and they run terrified somewhere else. And so how do we get the exploratory learning happening at a much earlier age and giving the access to rural schools, urban schools? My students are very low socioeconomic, where coming to us, hearing the word college, I've sat in SAD conferences where parents have told me that my kid can't go to college, don't even talk to them about that. And that's a really sad reality that many of us face. So I really encourage the panel to look at how do we intermingle the pathways so that traction is not lost, and to Rebecca's point about the equity of access to everyone.
So could we, so to that point, I want to see if it would be the pleasure of the group here, because I'm hearing, picking up on a theme here. When I listen to Becky, when I listen to Jeff, and these comments that have been made now, we really have taken us to a direction where, and I think this would be a great group to hear this from, is what are the outcomes? What are the outcomes that we want our students to have? Because if we have that embedded, then we get to the point where Jeff wants to run a tiki bar, I want to be a rock star, right? I said that last time. I've given up on that, though. But what are the outcomes, right? And if we have the outcomes right, then we should be what I always call porous, right? And be able to move through that. And then, so if we could address that question to an extent, and then I think the other one would be, to Liz's point earlier when she mentioned the other question that you were to think of, right? How do we, and I like the way somebody put this better than what we had it as a question, but showing the options to all students. Like, what are the options out there so that I know, and again, to the point earlier too that was made, these jobs aren't even there yet in some cases too, right? But looking at what are the options that, you know, being the old ag guy, Jeff, really doesn't matter. I always say you study agriculture, you do anything. You're a proof in point, right? And so So how do we show those options at the right level? Because we've heard that as a recurring theme in every single one of these, right? How do we get it early? How do the parents know? You know, the parents said to us, we want to understand what the options are, right? And so if we could take on those two things, please. What are the so I'll start with, what are the outcomes? What does this group believe every student ought to have when they come out of high school?
Something that's not really in the vocational report, but I'm on a chamber of commerce, a local chamber of commerce, and I listen to Indiana Packers and large employers and attendance. I mean, that's the number one thing I hear from employers is they want a drug-free workforce that attends on a regular basis. So supporting schools and their efforts to help make sure students get there each day, and supporting attendance as a metrics and giving us the resources to make sure families understand that, and the support of our local law enforcement, and just connecting all those will really serve employers well, I think.
I'm from Jasper, and we talked to a lot of people down there, the employers who have a pretty good amount of industry there, and they will tell you that they can hire people and bring them in to train them what they need them to do on the job, but they have a lot of those soft skills that we've talked about here. So I would think soft skills is one of those outcomes we need to work on. But then the other piece I think is critical thinking. And I think in some respects the ISTEP has exposed us. We went from about a 90% pass rate for our sophomores with the ECAs previously to a much drastically reduced pass rate now. What's the reason for that? Well, the reason for that isn't that our teachers are teaching differently, it's that the tests are different. And I think in many respects it's because they're expecting much greater critical thinking on those tests. So with regards to rigor we talked about earlier, and tying a pathway as passing the ECAs, I think there is rigor attached to that. That's a starting point, not an ending point. I think once a student demonstrates enough critical thinking to pass those ECAs, because I'm expecting that they won't look a whole lot different than they do now when they come out the next round, that we can start then focusing in on what are the other options for these students. We can't wait till their junior year. We start scheduling students for junior year, and January and February of their sophomore year, we're done by spring break. But we still have some options. As Jill mentioned earlier, we can't tie ourselves in. One piece of the GQE also, I would just from a principal's perspective, as it says, it has to be a piece of accountability. If students aren't held accountable for it, it'll be a real problem for high schools. I think middle school students, that's where they've been living for a long time, but high school students are a little different animals than middle school. I've been a principal both middle school and a high school, and so if there's no accountability for that assessment for students. But on the other hand, I think, as has been mentioned here also, that we need to have, what if a student's chance to passing that GQE is represented very, very low possibility after the first time they take it? What can we do to prepare those students for a workforce opportunity? And communication at a young grade is important. We talk a lot in our county, at least I meet with county principals and Jody sometimes on a regular basis, and we have students that come to our building, probably 90% of them have a plan to go to a four-year college. At least 75 to 80 and the others as associates. And to be honest with you, the success rate doesn't demonstrate that 90% of them should be going to college. So we need to communicate before they get there, what are the opportunities? And it's not just students, as we all know, it is the parents. What does success look like? Success looks like something that's relevant and interesting to students, not just a college degree. Many students think they got to go to college because it's the right thing to do, not because there's anything that they're interested in when they get there, other than college life. So what are the options for careers when we don't even know what the careers are going to be? That's a tough call. But I think critical thinking is one of those pieces that will help them no matter what path they decide to take when they leave high school.
I definitely agree with his points, and I think that there should be a service-based citizenship element to this. My students complete over 19,000 hours of community service voluntarily each year. And through that service-based education, they are exploring different careers. They're exploring different perspectives on life. And they're gaining skills where all of a sudden they're thrown in, if they're going to go work at a food bank, they're thrown in with a group of people that they don't know, but for that day, for that activity, for whatever they need to do, they need to be able to, mesh, meld, be a chameleon, get in there, and have that teamwork and that collaboration. So I think that looking at the service element is really important. We require for our students 24 hours. I have some students that are getting 200 hours a year because they've fallen in love so much with that experience. And those students that I see have those type of hours and have that type of commitment, they are the ones so far that have been very successful graduating from college, going into career fields, and they have not had an issue switching over into that realm. And that includes medical, engineering, and automotive and those type of industries.
Kerry Dank from Crystal House Schools. And so, there are many children out there whose parents do a wonderful job preparing them for what's going to happen next, but there are many, many more children who walk through the doors of school and they don't know many, many things. And it's hard for them to dream about what life might be like as an adult simply because they don't know. And I think that we need to do a better job of signaling to schools that things like career plans and aggressive exposure to the opportunities that exist not only in their community but across the state and even broader isn't something that's optional. It's something that has to be required, because students can't dream big if they can't imagine what their life might be like. And I think sometimes we as schools take that for granted that someone else is doing that.
I have some response to your outcome question. And I think to go back to a point, we have a number of students whose outcomes they have developed, and our role in the schools and to foster and build the capacity in those outcomes is really good. And I think that really speaks to the CTE conversation, because there are kids who woke up at one point and decided, this is what I want to do, and that's where I will find my passion. For the students that we really spend the bulk of our time with, I think, on a daily basis, are the students that we are trying to help them find that passion. And once we can find that passion, to align those passions with how they can best show their outcomes. And for us, that's 3 measurable ways, because those have to be measurable in some way. For us, that's content, some skill, and some work ethic. And I'm sure we've all heard Duxworth, the grit, research, where how do you measure grit? And are those skills translatable? So oftentimes when we look at building those outcomes and deciding what those things are, it is around defining those skills and what that looks like for a student, and making sure at the building level that those skills are translatable. Because it's more important to me that a child leaves, the 9th grade or the 10th grade, really looking at the rest of their high school education as what skills can I transfer regardless of what decisions I make after high school, regardless of potentially the job that I wanted to do that will no longer be there in 5 years, or the job that I don't even know I want to do because it's not there yet. So then those transferable skills really open up the opportunities. But those outcomes for us are content, skill, and grit.
Went to DePaul University for my undergrad, and regardless of your major, there were 3 outcomes: quantitative reasoning, oral, and then written skills as well, and you had to attain those. And I think that's somewhat what we're thinking through here. You got to attain those in a lot of ways. As a math major, chemistry major, quantitative reasoning, that one was pretty easy for me to get. I knew others that really struggled in those areas, and thankfully for their content areas, they had courses that allowed that demonstration of skills. So as I was even making notes here, kind of to your point about we want kids to be able to problem solve. quantitative reasoning, because of course math rules. Maybe around the financial literacy part, because I hear that oftentimes too, that that's a barrier for kids being successful. They get caught up in lots of issues. The communication side, I think we can't necessarily ignore the digital citizenship that's sometimes weighting us down. However, I would ask the question though to you, Dr. Ernest, that we talked about that this is focused on pathways, and I want to be careful that we're not suggesting that all these things we're listing become part of the pathway for every kid that is that additional piece. And I guess to my point earlier, they're saying, here's my DePaul experience, and I was a math major, and I was able to attain those three. Our students that are coming through in an academic honors diploma, core 40 diploma, technical honors diploma, in the concentrator world, they are exhibiting many of those skills. So I think so many of these skills are already embedded in those programs that we've got to be thinking too still about how do we help the kids that aren't able to demonstrate those in a content world. And maybe it is through, as Jill's suggesting, through some service learning that can be that passion and ignites them. So as we focus on those pathways, let's think about how do we get those kids to exhibit those in those pathways and not make it a diploma requirement for everybody, because those diploma requirements are embedded already, 44, 46, 48 credits, all those different things.
You know, I agree that the point that Rebecca was making earlier that, and that other thing said about flexibility and access probably happen to be priority concepts in this. I also think, though, in looking at the access to existing pathways, that the challenge we have and the opportunity is to ensure that across those different pathways, the rigor and the quality of the educational experiences and how meaningful and useful they are to students as they exit our high schools, that all of those things are of equal value, so that some pathways aren't more than others, and that they all are addressing the kinds of issues that we're talking about around the table now, so that students are prepared to participate in our communities and our economy in a meaningful way. So it may be that the real challenge of the community is to identify those characteristics of rigor that are applicable across all of the pathways without trying to distinguish any particular. There's a standard setting process that all of the pathways must meet in terms of the expectations we have.
Can I mention to Dr. Best's point a moment ago about adding on, just 2 years ago, we have a health occupations course, many schools around the state do, it's very popular, but we had a difficult time getting a lot of our top students, top academic students into the course because it takes 2 periods of the day. They couldn't find the time to do so. So we actually had to create a course that backed up to lunch so that they take a period and their lunch in order to be part of that program, which is very valuable to them. So the potential of adding a lot of requirements on top of those academic honor diploma students could potentially prevent, such a course.
I think as an outcome, every student, regardless of their pathway, should know what their next step is. They should know if it's college acceptance, if they're already employed. They should know what they're doing the day after they leave us.
I also think that it is extremely important to go off of Mr. Murphy's point, removing the stigma that's associated with different career fields, with different programs. As we approach that, some of the words that I've said so far today, they have negative connotation. English teacher, time for an English lesson. When I said military school, some people in the room probably thought that I'm a reform school or that we get the bad bad kids that you're gonna, beat into submission. But actually, our military part is transformational, it's empowerment, it's leadership. When we said career and when we say CTE, there is a stigma, and we're working to get away from that, but it is the kids that can't handle this path, we put them that way. When I say community service, and this is something that we work with our students, because while we have many students who come to us that are from lower socioeconomic places, and we have some students that come to us from a higher area. And when you say community service, that sounds punitive, because that has been part of our system. You commit a crime, you do community service. And so helping transform that connotation where you change what it means, where this is being a good person, this is serving, this is how you help find these explorations. That's a really large task for you, Dr. Ernest, to figure out how to remove the panel too, to figure out how do we remove the stigma that will eventually get associated with pathways. And I think by making them equally rigorous and by making sure that one is not lesser than the other, I think that is extremely important. How to do that, that's on you guys.
Well, I think to give Dr. Freitas credit, because he talked about this, I think, 2 meetings ago, this is revolutionary from the standpoint that we have a major culture change to make here. Isn't that what you said? I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but because I'm just not as smart as you to talk like that. But I think it's revolutionary to be culture changing, right? Because that's where, as the old ag teacher, we used to have that challenge as well, because a student wanted to take agriculture. Well, one, I could point them to that their average salary was going to be higher than anyone else's at the time, because it's one of the better industries to be in, right? But yet still, other people were like, gosh, you want to go into agriculture? Well, yeah, sure. Because then you could run a tiki bar later if you want to, right? And so you're exactly right. That maybe is one of the number one things that really I don't think the legislature ever had in mind in writing this, of how to change the stigma, but yet it's going to be an important piece to this. I teed you up. Do you want to say anything there?
I think as we talk about these things, I still go back to right attitudes and good character qualities is still one of the most important things for students to do well in life. You can have all the content, all the knowledge you can have, but if you don't have the right attitude of going to work on time, wanting to get along with people, communicating properly, setting goals, having dreams and visions and trying to fulfill those in your life, those things to me are still vitally important. And these pathways, I don't know that we can incorporate it in a pathway. I wouldn't know. The only way I would know is if you had a course that you would require on one of those, or at least one of the pathways would be to have a course on developing right attitudes and character qualities. What you'd call that, I don't know. Some schools have character counts as one of their themes, and those students seem to really do well with that. I just went to a elementary school last couple days ago. Can't remember my days now, but just the last 3 or 4 days, and they take Stephen Covey's 7 highly effective
students, 7 habits of a highly effective student.
Yes, that's the theme of this whole elementary school. 300 or 400 students, and I've been there 2 or 3 times, and every time I walk in there, I'm so impressed I can't even believe it. I'm thinking, why doesn't everybody do this? Because they're developing right thinking, right attitudes to help them be successful in life. When I walk in here, he's a 10 or 11-year-old kid. He says, "Hello, Senator Cruz." And I said, "Well, how do you know who I am?" He did his work. Somebody told him, to study and find out who's coming, and he was my host. And they just, it's amazing how revolutionary that was, it is in these students' lives. I think these kids are all going to do much better because of that.
2 points. The first, I would encourage the senator to file that legislation next session. We can't do it on the state board. BJ and I have been working on this issue for 5 years, 6 years, And for some reason, we can't get it through the regulatory process, but certainly through the legislative process, I think we can. And I believe Representative Boehning is on board with that too. So we would work together with you and Boehning on that. The other point, the chair raised a good question about outcomes. And I'm looking forward to the meetings where we start to put some meat on all these ideas out there, because there's a lot of great ideas. And some we can incorporate, some we cannot. But the notion of starting with outcomes and then working backwards might be the way the committee would want to go in the future. And because I hear a lot of good things. I hear about the work ethic certificate, or this notion of character education, which all students in Indiana need, not only CTE students. But maybe there's a set of those that could be put forward in a outcome-based way. And someone else mentioned, I think it was Todd mentioned, some outcome-based standards that we may want to look at. And I think high schools are already doing that, so it'd just be a matter of documentation. But I would urge us to consider, through the chair, that maybe we need to start with a set of outcomes when we get to that point, and then work backwards on the pathways. The other thing that was said, I think my colleague two seats over on my right said, which really hit me today, he said, quote, ECAs are not a pathway. And that sort of really floored me today, because I was on board thinking that maybe ECAs might be the way, and they are not a pathway. ECAs are an assessment, and it's not a pathway. And so thanks, Jason, for that. But again, I would go back to that notion of creating a set of outcome standards or outcome competencies, and then move us backwards on how we populate that.
So I'd like to also kind of piggyback on what Dr. Britton said with another component that offers an extension of that perspective. We're talking about rigor. I think it's going to be important to define what that means. Too often people think of rigor as the percentage of students who fail and how hard it is. Rigor is how meaningful something is it challenging and engaging? So as we look at moving towards those outcomes that you're talking about, Dr. Davis, then we have to make sure that all pathways are meaningful, challenging, and engaging, and that it's our responsibility as educators to ensure that students can successfully reach the destination that they aim at.
I have several comments to make, and it seems like there's more as I listen to more people talk. And to Dr. Freitas, I know at the third pathway meeting, I actually have it in my notes. You said, I feel like a ship adrift. At some point we have to right the ship and head into a policy direction. We need systems approach. I appreciate the fact that you keep bringing that up, because I agree with you very much. To what Senator Cruz and Liz had just said a little while ago about having those basic skills that help you be successful, and Liz, that those skills be transferable skills. Because what happens sometimes, and I have this experience with my oldest son, who's a National Merit Scholar, full ride to Purdue. He's great in math and science. He's going to be an engineer. And people have convinced him of that, and he's convinced of it. And then his senior year, does 3 internships in engineering, comes home one day and says, Mom and Dad, I don't want to be an engineer. But he has the transferable skills, so now he can be successful in another field of study. And Dr. Ernest, I love your question, what are the outcomes we want? And I think it varies by student. And I think that's the importance of our counselors helping and working with these parents to make sure that they're designing something the student's passionate about. You know, John Milliman, you talked about your refugee students. As superintendent of East Allen County Schools, we get the refugee grant as well, high Burmese population. So what's an outcome we would like for those Burmese students who were born maybe in a refugee camp, or whose parents were born in a refugee camp, to have a program available like East Allen University, where you could leave high school with an associate's degree in one hand and your high school diploma in the other hand, and we have completely broken that cycle that refugee family found themselves in when they came to our country. So the outcomes will vary. And I really like what Patrick had said earlier today about, math finally means something to a mechanic when they see how it fits into what they're passionate about. And that's what I believe we really have to do. We have to nurture those passions, and we have to have all of those pathways available so that kids can really achieve their dreams. And I know it's going to be difficult to achieve because we've heard someone said about manpower. We may not have the manpower to do these things, but I think having the transferable skills and the basic skills and realizing that every student is different and working with them to develop and spark that interest. As a principal for years, one of my jobs was to evaluate teachers. And one of the things I really always look for in a great teacher is they make the subject come alive for their student. And that's what we need to do with these students. We need to nurture that passion that's already there and make it come alive and make it become a reality.
Jim.
I just wanted to reinforce, when we went through our high school redesign, and I'm gonna quantify this or qualify this by saying how incredibly important the academic content and knowledge of the academic content is, and keeping the rigor is important. Dr. Freitas came up with a term, I think in the first or second meeting, and I failed to capture that in my notes, about what soft skills were. And I knew you were really pushing us to try to utilize that term on a more regular basis. Do you remember what that was? I can go back and watch the video.
Essential professional skills.
Perfect.
Essential professional skills.
There we go.
EPS.
EPS, okay.
And some people have slipped today, I noticed. We're going to try to get them back to it.
Keep bringing us back. When we looked at high school redesign in Wayne Township, one of the things that we were very concerned about is through this movement in the accountability age that we had been in under No Child Left Behind, that we had truly gotten away from everything that people are talking about with those skills that we kept hearing from our employers were important. Those things that did not deal with math, language arts, science, anything that we were teaching in our content areas, but those employability skills that Senator Cruz was talking about. And so we took a look at the Wayne Township values, which were created back in the early 70s, and habits of mind, and combine those together into what we always create our own thing. It's called the Wayne Habits of Success. But in doing so, we were able to carve out time out of each academic period so that we could create what we call an impact period. And in that impact period, we are very intentional about working through those habits of success. The question that often comes up, and I know it's one that I hate to advocate for, but I know is the reality, is how do we assess that? How does that become part of this the accountability of this pathway? Because there has to be a measurement in order for people to say you have met that standard of whatever that skill is. And I think when you're talking about something as subjective sometimes as those habits of success or those habits of mind, I'm not sure there is and maybe Brandy Oliver or some of the other counselors could bring forth an assessment that we could use, but I'm not advocating for more assessments. But I do think those are critically important. The question is, how do we have students demonstrate that they have met those and be a viable piece in any pathway that is created? That's a significant challenge, and I don't have an answer for that, but I know they are important, and probably more important than anything else we do in our schools today. The generations that graduated years before always talk about how horrible today's students are. But yet we see amazing things happening from them. So how do we get there with helping them to also develop those other skills that are critically important beyond just attendance and being drug-free?
I think I heard Dr. McCormick say once that this panel may be the most important panel that's been assembled to decide some very important requirements for graduation, and I agree with that. I agree with Jill. I really would not want to be the person, that's why it's good as a panel, to make decisions on where do we go from here. What do those pathways look like? Rebecca said it very well. These pathways exist already. There's not one idea that some school isn't already doing. So the goal is, I'm not going to tell you obviously what the job is, but the goal is to try to synthesize that and say, what can we put into pathways that already exist? And I understand that. I think that just if I could, because I know we're getting close to the value statement and this is too long for a value statement, but if I could, the caution I give is I served on the high school diploma task force, and it was similar dialogue. Once we opened the high school diploma, literally every department said we need more requirements in our department. Fine arts needs to be required for everyone, foreign language needs to be required, and I can't argue with that. Social studies 4 years, math 4 years, English, I can't argue with any of that. Then we got to the point of, is this truly good for students? Is this even doable? And the outcome, we're talking about outcome, the outcome of that was we reverted back to, and the state board voted unanimously, keep the diploma exactly as it is. In other words, in its simplicity, it can be successful. So again, that's my encouragement to the panel. I think that's the tough part. I've not heard literally, except maybe mine, I've not heard one bad idea. Not one. So how do you take all of that? That I think is going to be the tough part, is you have this nice stew, but if you add too much to the stew, it becomes not very good, not very productive. So that's my caution is not to try to throw every good idea we've heard into a student outcome, because that ultimately hurts students. And the other thing I hope that will stay on the table is, and I think there's a lot of debate around this, is that I think assessments can be a pathway. I do want to reiterate that. My colleagues believe that. If we say assessments can't be part of a pathway, then ASVAB is gone. All industrial certifications are gone because they involve assessments. ECA is gone. I think we then really handcuff ourselves with possibilities. I will say this again. If ECA is not part of that discussion, then ECA loses its relevancy for high school students, then why take it? A federal mandate is not good enough reason to take it. I want to take it because it means something for the student's next step of their lives. We're going to spend all this money and time, and let's make it worth something for the students. I think that will be something meaningful for them, as well as other options if it doesn't work out. Thank you.
Todd?
I just want to make a comment about the ECA, and I hear what you're saying, because one of the words that I heard you say is simple, keep it simple, and I agree with that. But the problem that I have with the ECA is that it's not relevant to anybody at this time. And so if we can find an assessment, I don't know that anybody's against an assessment, but if we can find an assessment that has relevancy, then I think that would be a better way to go.
What do you mean by that, by relevance?
It's not recognized by a college, it's not recognized by an industry, and sometimes, and it's had a lot of, and I don't mean this negative, but it's changed vendors, it's changed standards, it's just very, very difficult. We don't get a lot of feedback about if our students, how our students are performing, what skills they need to get better on to be able to perform better the next time. We get no information back about really how we can help our students with that. We are standards-based grading, and we use our standards-based rating scales because that's a lot more relevant for us. And so it's, how do we find something that can give us meaningful feedback?
So I guess, piggyback on what Steve said a moment, I'm not sure that ECAs and the tests are the path. The question is whether or not they validate the path. So I mean, that's just a little different way to look at how these assessments can be relevant. You know, a comment with Jeff talking about the EPSs, or the professional skills. It may be that we don't necessarily need a new strand of courses. It may be that what they do is describe the way instruction occurs in general throughout K-12. So that if you're talking about mathematics instruction, it develops those habits of mind. If you're talking about certification down through skill development, you still have instructional experiences that incorporate those kinds of professional skills that we're talking about, so that then they're reflected in the way the teachers and students interact with each other across all content. That may be one way, Jeff, to get at the point you.
Todd?
So I think I'll go back to the beginning when we kind of opened up and said, we see this as great opportunities for kids. And the conversation with a student, and I've been in that high school seat and you're trying to help a kid move through those 4 years, is that your pathway is this honors diploma opportunity. And you've got to do a lot of work to get there. One part of that in Indiana is our end of course assessment.
and it has rigor to it, and it is relevant where it is that course-based assessment. For many kids, could be one of the most rigorous things that they accomplish. Now, yes, they'd have English 11, English 12, some other math courses as a part of their other Core 40 diplomas. But we have to think about equal and equitable. That, yes, there's an equal test for everybody. That ECA in my world, in the math world, would not have been a very difficult test for me. But I can tell you for one of my sons, who's now wearing his way through a college math class, that was a pretty difficult kind of an assessment. So there is still value and rigor to those particular assessments as they continue down their path of their chosen diploma. So I guess we have to think about, again, those kids who are meeting that bar, and it is just kind of meeting that bar, and we don't want that just for them. We want them to go way above it, but let's open that door for them. And again, this pathways conversation is all about adding flexibility for kids who can't meet that particular level. And now we can create opportunities and context for them where they can be successful, expose them to their passion areas, and then they can earn that particular diploma. And as we know, then that gives them further doors open in their career interests or their college interests. Because again, kids mature. Jeff made that comment earlier as well. From 14 to 18, there's an amazing level of maturity that grows. So that student that gains on something near the end exhibits the skills that we want them to exhibit. And a college is willing to take that chance on them. And they, again, find their passion. Then let's support them in those kinds of ways. And that pathway to that opportunity is done in a couple ways. One, through that intercourse assessment, and then achieving that standard, that desired diploma, and then creating these other opportunities for them to exhibit the skills.
One thing that I would point out as an emphasis for outcomes, the financial literacy piece, I think, is essential. Looking at or having conversations with my graduates, what they like to call adulting, they don't have those skills. When I see my young teachers coming out of college and you're trying to help explain retirement and insurance to people who have a college degree, they still haven't learned those skills. So I think no matter what pathway that we go for or whatever pathway process you go through, making sure that that is included as an essential skill either at the secondary level or at the higher education level and the career level, that's going to be very important because that's part of making sure that they're successful.
And I think it is possible to measure the affective domain and character and your grit and give you some feedback starting in junior high or middle school, that we can train teachers and we can collect data on that and give parents some feedback and students some feedback about what strengths they have and what strengths they need to develop. I think that's okay. What gets measured gets done, and it's okay to receive that feedback.
I had two brothers who became lawyers, and my first brother that became a lawyer, he's got a doctorate of jurisprudence, went 7 or 8 years to college. He comes back home, we have an office for him. He walks into his office, he sits there, what do I do now? With a doctor's degree, nobody ever told him how to function as a lawyer. They never walked him into a courthouse, never walked him into a federal jurisdiction area. He knew nothing about how to practically practice law, even though he had a doctor's degree. He said, I don't know how to file a case. I don't know how to make a will. Practical things, or how to incorporate a corporation. I'm thinking, this is ridiculous that you've done all of this and no one ever taught you how to actually practice law, how to set up an office, how to run an office, how to file a lawsuit. To me, you can get so far out into unreality of all this academic stuff that it just doesn't do you any practical good of being a successful lawyer. And I had two other brothers who didn't go to, one went for a few weeks and ended up flunking out, and another one never won at all. Those both made multi-millions of dollars. And I'll tell you, the main reason is they worked hard. just sitting here thinking of what I said a little while ago, but really what it is that determination. I'm going to work hard. My brother, who became really very wealthy, he said, you know, I'll outwork anybody and I'll be successful because I'm going to work harder than anybody else. I can do it. That attitude just makes people successful. I mean, you can do it. If you're determined to do it, get out there, you can overcome obstacles and you still get it done.
On that note of great enthusiasm, you could be a coach. Brandon, this is when I put you on the spot. If you would give us a quick review of where we've been today. While he's doing that, as has become our practice, each person will give us their value or thought moving forward that you want to, and I've been amazed at how we've used those moving forward, right? A lot of those have been brought up today as well. So, Brandon, you're on if you and your squeaky pens are ready. Grab that microphone, by the way.
Okay, so we actually jumped from your introductory comments straight to public comment. And from the public comment, we started with not every student is the same. We have, you know, A, B, C, different students with different backgrounds, experiences, and a lot of them are being funneled into somewhat outdated solutions to future problems. So the main things were versatility, options, flexibility, and access. So, for example, versatility, there's a lot of emphasis placed on testing, and a school or district was losing up to 20 days of solid curriculum because of testing. And we're serving diverse populations, and so a versatile look is going to help to serve different populations better. There was something about options, about how there's even different kinds of math, not one size fits all. Math experience is necessary for different people, so if there's a way to expand pathways, and also that flexibility is needed because students change their minds. Students might be on one path and decide years later that they want to change. And so flexibility is needed so that you're not on just this one track and you lose everything when you move on. Single diploma. So there was a lot of energy around this idea of a single diploma that has basically no distinction. So I don't know what you guys are working on, but what I can understand is that there may be different types of diplomas, and so those other diplomas or distinctions have different stigmas or different reputations. So there's one diploma that all people can get that holds the same weight that is recommended. Access to education. So maybe that's high school, maybe it's post-grad, but just access to different options. Multiple pathways, and ultimately all of these different pathways still leading to a single diploma option. There's some energy around aligning the curriculum to workforce needs, that there's a misalignment there. Again, kind of tying into outdated solutions for future problems. But there are a lot of missed opportunities that are often non-academic, and how we can be versatile to address the non-academic opportunities that are missed or not being trained on. Respecting all students' abilities, having a hands-on experience. There was a student who was really in the cars, and I was excited as that example. And ultimately, there's just a ton of room for strength and flexibility. If people are being more flexible, allowed to have more options, this system will work for a lot more people. So that's public comment. 3, So we started with a report out, and the report showed that there was certain students that were doing better or are achieving higher, and so there was a question about why is that? Why are these certain people having better outcomes? And it was that some of those folks are more focused. Focus is a valuable thing. Digging deeper into that, it was the question of, is there a false dichotomy in the data? Are people really being pushed more towards academic, or is there being an understanding that it's one or the other? Can students choose both? Ultimately, the data has improved, and there's a lot more data that's accessible to help think through these problems and solutions. Another question or comment that came out of this conversation is how do we make sure that there is rigor and accountability? Is there a third party or certifications for this data or for the assessments that are being made at both the state level and at the student level, so that everybody is really understanding what's happening? Are the reports showing why are these students doing what they're doing? It's usually because students are interested or they want to learn that particular kind of curriculum. This is not a cherry-picked situation, but this is outcomes because the learning is relevant to certain students. We moved on, the past versus future argument. So there was someone was really interested in acknowledging the past, but really leading into the future and what the future looks like for this work and for education. So then we moved into some other opportunities and examples. There's a lot of energy here in this conversation around people being a work-based, site-based learning versus test learning, and that there is often students are being pulled out of the environments in which they're thriving in, and then forced to then be assessed in comfort environments they're not as comfortable with. Partnership is very important in this work. Partners can give intel on what's important, what's needed, such as how often showing up, what other kind of issues are out there. There's lots of statistics about non-English speaking or non-English as a second language students being accounted for in future conversations. There's something about is education an opportunity to basically present students a manual or a journey, which is the difference is in a manual, here's your path, here's your future. Journal is blank, and a lot of students enter into education, not with a lot of things set in stone, so they get to kind of detail their journey as they go. Here, there was a conversation about too many options being a barrier, and not wanting this done to me but for me. Some struggle with the term stackable and work ethic certifications not being enough. People wondering if career, college, and military pathways these pathways are going to allow students to switch lanes and change their trajectories. Big energy around tests and assessments not themselves being a path, but maybe being an assessment into the validation of paths. There was a conversation about the core of education. What is the essential seed to any pathway, core 40, scholar track, capstone, as a way to gauge learning? How early are we introducing kids to paths? There was a grade school 7-year-old story. Is that happening across the board? And so all of this energy led into, well, what is the end goal? What are we really trying to do? What's going to be the outcome, the ultimate outcome for students? And someone said this should definitely be a start, work backwards, because if we start with those transferable skills and those things that are fundamental and building blocks, you can work towards jobs that don't even exist yet. But if you have things like content and skill, work ethic, grit, service, a level of expectation, imagination, and some experience, that will be a well-rounded base for students. Some of the other things that we're talking about is how do we destigmatize certain terms, certain pathways. How do we understand that remedial and career tech are not the same, that all pathways want leadership, want high quality workers, and remediation is actually acceleration. That was a really good switch of the way to look at something. And then ultimately, again, this is about productive, meaningful life, about making life choices, being good citizens, problem solving, and there's also a lot of energy around pathways. That pathways are not, they don't need to be invented. They're already here, they just need to be cleared. So with the right attitude and good character, producing students like that, that have a sense of goals and outcome and success is what people are interested in talking to about in the future.
Thank you. There was a lot today, wasn't there?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. So, as is our practice for our values, BJ, I'm starting with you and going to your left, please. That'd mean you, Patrick, would be next. Okay.
Thanks for clarification. I think the most impactful thing for me today was the fact that when things are relevant for students, our success rate goes up. So, I mean, we need to make sure that we are introducing students to as many things as possible at an early age so they can figure out what it is they love to do, and we can spend our time fostering that learning.
So BJ had mentioned earlier that sadly there are open seats in some classrooms that lead to high-wage, high-demand careers with certifications. I believe that the perception of career and tech ed programs and industries is one of the biggest issues that's facing our economy and will be for the next 15 or 20 years if we don't address it. One of the things Dr. Butts brought up is kind of the categorization of, or the titles of different pathways. I think I, for one, am a big supporter of the single diploma. If we try to classify kids as learners and workers and protectors, we're really doing them a disservice because they develop skills that cross over so much into different pathways. The last thing I'd mention is it's very difficult for us to determine a young student's potential or what their interests are going to be in the future. For that reason, at least I know throughout all of our career and tech ed districts, we believe in college and career readiness for all. We are striving for every student to be prepared for whatever option might come before them in the future. And then from that point on, we certainly encourage lifelong learning for everyone who attends our programs. Thank you for allowing me to participate today.
Value I chose today was individualization, and it goes right along with BJ's comment of relevance. These students come to us with a passion, and they have attributes, and we need to discover what those are and nurture those.
Obtainable is a word I guess I keep coming back to again, and that goes to the concept of instead of doing to students, doing for them and helping them. Obtainable, I think, is a big word. It may look good on paper, but is it obtainable in what they already have to complete in the high school 4 years? And the other word is I go back to, is simplistic. I think success can be found in simplicity. I think if we create a checklist of things to fix what's going on in our schools, I think we'll just get that, which is a checklist that won't have relevance or meaning. And I love Brandon, I think it's Brandon, I love the terminology for creating a journal for our students instead of a manual. I think they've been told enough, this is what you must do. Let's let them explore and give them the options to create what they can do.
I think for me, it's outcomes. Not only just kind of that base level of here's what we expect a high school graduate to have, but then also what things are unique to those students based on where they're going after high school. What are the outcomes they need to be successful?
So when I said to someone that I was participating in this panel, I got this litany of concerns about what's going to happen with students who have a disability. So I started mulling over that, and I finally realized that that concern in some ways is applicable to many other students in the system. So we know that in our system there are students who, if they fail, they become disabled. If they drop out of school, then the system has disabled them. And it's predictable by their profiles. Generally, they're students on free and reduced lunch, and they have disabilities and some other characteristics. So for me, the value today is that all of these pathways that we're talking about have to become enabling experiences for students, so that as a result of processing through the teaching and learning experiences in these pathways, students have been enabled for success in life.
I think I'm going to also agree with career and college readiness. I think when we think of pathways, we need to be cognizant that not all parts of the state can have programs like the program you were at. I'm sure that took a lot of money and resources. While I liked your community service, I think about students at Shakamak High School where they live in Jasonville and there's 2 businesses and that's a gas station and a liquor store. So, you know, I urge the panel to think about what all students in Indiana can participate in. And I also think about, I'm worried if we go too much down one panel, like welding, for example, has been mentioned several times, and we certainly have welding at Vincennes University where I work, but I see a lot of welders who come back with back problems, and then they have to be re-educated and do something else. So I worry about going too far down a pathway that you can't come back from, and I think if we're looking at career, you know, and education is a big component of that.
I think that pathways do exist now. And many kids are choosing very successful pathways, and let's recognize and celebrate and acknowledge all of that, and that these pathways create opportunities and flexibility for kids that aren't finding that right pathway, or we're having to waver them through with no clear direction. That these pathways offer a much more definitive way for kids to be successful after high school, and I think that's some of the outcome that we were hoping for.
So I am hopeful and optimistic about some of the changes that I think we'll see for our students, children moving forward. And I would like to make sure that we remember that it will be equally as important to ensure that schools have the capacity to deliver on those changes. My hunch is that we won't see a lot of new money coming into schools. And so there's certainly an opportunity for us to be creative in how we clear the way and remove rules and barriers that inhibit schools from doing this work. And we shouldn't forget that too.
I think that it was Steve Baker who shared something about talking with students and that they gave feedback that they were interested in pathways that were obtainable and relevant. And I think the word relevant came up a lot today. We've had different buzzwords at different panel meetings, but today relevant seemed to come up a lot. And today was also the first day, I think, that I heard the word portfolio used. And I'm really intrigued by that because I think that that provides both of those words, Steve, obtainable and relevant, and it also addresses different needs, different pathways for different students, and it's something that they could utilize to demonstrate their learning. So that's my takeaway today, is to kind of investigate a little bit this idea of a portfolio.
agree with all of those so far, but communication for me, communicating with our students and our parents, opportunities that exist, both in education and careers, and methods they can go forth and pursue new opportunities as we go forward.
I think just to echo some of the big buzzwords that we've all said and heard, flexibility, definitely support flexibility, transferability, and accessibility in the pathways. And I think as you've talked about, the next step for you is really the accountability piece and how to measure these things. And I would encourage that conversation to hopefully be purposeful so that those means of measurement and accountability don't diminish the ground level work that we are hoping to do with the students with this opportunity, because we are very, very excited to talk about these open opportunities with them.
Just to reiterate a few things that I've heard, the portfolio, I like that idea, and also the relevance. Sometimes I think we have to have the relevance for the students, but also to inform the parents that to get the stigma, because many times these students think that they have to go to a four-year college because that's what their parents think, because they don't want their kids to become a welder because maybe that's not the best opportunity for them. So informing the parents, I think, to get the stigma so the kids can.
I'll go back to Carly's statement, a new system to see if a student is ready to graduate. It's a really courageous conversation we've had today. I've been excited about it. Our society runs on data, and if we're brave enough to look at a system that goes beyond a standard assessment, we can create data metrics to measure that. It'll take time. It'll take collaboration with our business partners. All those ideas, capstone, portfolio, work-based placement, all those are exciting. I can't wait to see what, as a state, we create. But it's going to take some time. It's going to take some training for schools. It's going to take some support and some feedback, because there's a lot of things we're not thinking about, and schools are great resources. And as long as we provide those things and give people time to retrain and redevelop some systems, if we do that well, I know it'll be successful.
I think the takeaway for me today was simply a visualization of the comments that were made. I think if I could draw as beautifully as we see up there, we'd see a set of circles, all with our own, the things we want to bring to the table for our students. And in there, I think we would see some great commonalities. The conversation that occurred today was so hopeful. And the one thing I would say about the work that the panel has to do is it is an awesome opportunity. But at the center of every comment that I heard from everyone today was that there were a set of guiding principles. And at the heart of all of those was the dignity of each and every individual student. So I commend the panel for the work, and I'm very honored to be here with you today. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. First of all, I appreciate all of the comments from the collaborators. I tried to be quiet today and just to listen and take it all in. I still believe we have a pretty huge challenge. As Steve said, we heard lots of good ideas, no bad ideas today. And I think one of our challenges on the panel is how do we funnel all of that great information into a finished product. We heard consistency over the last 3 meetings, values of flexibility and rigor, obtainable and relevant, opening the opportunities, efficient testing system, engage kids early, making things manageable, the importance of soft skills. I think some of the concepts that I'm struggling with as I listen to all this is structure versus process. We talk a lot about, I think, the boxes of what those pathways are, even though they'll be permeable boxes, but the process to get there, I think, is as significant of a challenge. How do we ensure flexibility, and how do we ensure early engagement? And a lot of that's going to be around professional development with guidance counselors and working with principals as we go forward. The other issue, and I think Jason has alluded to this a number of times, which keeps coming back to me, is beware of the pendulum. And I think too often as organizations, we see a need or a concern And we have a tendency to go all the way to the other end of the continuum. And whether that's about, everything was college bound and we're going to go all the way over on the career side, whether that's we had too much remediation and now we need to go to no remediation. And I'm not sure, BJ alluded to it earlier, remediation in itself can be good. And I think, how do we ever get to grit and making sure kids persevere unless they have to struggle through some of these things? And if they have the ability just to jump pathways very easily, then are they going to miss that opportunity of failing and struggling and having to go back and persevere to be successful? I think as we talked about outcomes today, and I've seen schools do this, I've seen school systems do this, where they talk about the profile of an Indiana high school graduate. What is that profile? And the other piece is, as we talked about, and we heard the comments about ECA, and it may just be me, and I'm just not smart enough to take it all in, but I'm wondering if we have to have a conversation about what is a pathway, because we're saying, well, assessment is, ECA is not a pathway, or ECA is a pathway, assessment's not a, I'm wondering, do we need to even go backtrack and say, what is a pathway? At least for small thinkers like myself, that might be helpful. Thank you.
Indiana Association of Public Schools Superintendents also thanks you for the opportunity to be at the table today, and that's who I'm representing. And while I eat my breakfast, I have a spoon in one hand and I have my phone in the other, and I came across a blog this morning that I think Dr. Ernest you'll appreciate, and tried to be succinct in my comments by utilizing some of the thoughts that were in there. Agreeing with much of what has been said already, I do believe that compromise is important when it makes sense. And as the song lyrics go, there can be no compromise when you know it's wrong. The task before this panel is significant, and one of the things that has to occur through these discussions and as we explore what pathways actually are is keeping a focus on those pathways that are going to lead to our students' success and making sure that we're not creating artificial barriers that are going to block those opportunities that they have. So, thank you.
Valued equally. I've been very consistent in the close of each meeting, and I really appreciate Mr. Murphy's comments. That I think one of our other challenges is that we need to make sure that we value whatever pathways we develop, that they're valued equally, that we do not create one pathway that is messaged as the best pathway, and all the others are options. So I think that's a great challenge. So very
I'd like to thank you for the invitation today as well, and echo Alan, my value would be value. To the same point that I think Mr. Best's point about, the academic honors on the track, perhaps is you don't need to overthink some of that. Students have taken a variety of courses, they've prepared themselves, they've shown themselves through other examples of being flexible themselves and being able to make those adjustments in careers. But for the students that I brought up, our students with English as a first language, I think we owe it to them to honor their work and persistence and academic success, but not to lower the bar, because I like the word yet. We talked a lot about students who college is not for them. I like to say yet. They may come back and decide that they need it. And I think we have a responsibility to give them the prerequisite skills while they're in our care to help them be successful, whether that be at age 20, 30, 40, or 50 when they go back to get that degree. So with that, I would say value is my value.
For me, the value remains the same, which is currency. When we think about what the litmus test for a pathway should be, I would argue that it should be something that provides a student currency. What do they do post-high school, whether that's post-secondary education and training, whether that's gainful employment, whether that's military service. So then, we've had a pretty good streak of no bad ideas, but I can't resist the urge to respond to John's question, which is, what is a pathway? And I reflect all the way back to that, both the legislative charge, we've heard from the business higher ed community, we've heard from the students themselves, teachers, and even the school leaders today. And I guess what I'd like to propose is that a pathway really has three building blocks. The first is academics, and we're talking, and these are building blocks that should be universal across all pathways. There might be an infinite number of pathways, but what are the core non-negotiables? First being academics. I would say that would be basic English and math literacy. The second would be applied learning. I think we heard pretty unequivocally from students that there's an arbitrary divide between academics and technical learning, and how can we provide more opportunities for students that allows them to acquire those skills in a variety of ways, but ultimately it results in some sort of deliverable that would have some sort of currency with employers, colleges, whether it's a portfolio, a capstone experience, et cetera. And then finally, I do think that I want to clarify something I said before. I don't think an assessment in and of itself is a pathway, but I think assessment is absolutely a key component of a pathway. Well, let's just make sure that's an assessment that's relevant to whatever that student's going to do next.
Same kind of focus with the pathway. I think that a pathway is something, it's the experiences that lead you to a value-added opportunity that inevitably is going to allow students to be successful in life. So definitely one of the key points that I want to leave is equal access to those opportunities for all students. And then I still feel there's relevancy with an assessment as long as it's a minimum proficiency, and then maximizing their learning experiences through that authentic connection, whether it be to college or careers. So, taking that assessment, and then it's just like with the associate's degree. I always like to tell the students, here you are with your high school diploma, here you are with your associate's degree. And some students, I have to remove the associate's degree to make sure that the high school diploma is accessible. It's kind of like the same thing what we're doing here. We have a minimal level of proficiency, and then we're trying to make access to all these pathways to develop opportunities for them to be successful in life.
My comment takes the form of a reminder for all of us that the legislature provided us a great gift. If you read the law, there are few barriers in the law. And so we have an opportunity to work outside the box. And I notice that when we start each meeting, that pane of whiteness over there is never filled in. It isn't filled in with all the things we've been doing for many years in Indiana. It's a blank slate. And the legislature has said to us, what should it be? So I hope we do something highly creative, out of the box, that would be innovative in many kinds of ways. Yes, we can learn from the past, but is there a new way of doing this? I don't know yet. We spent a lot of time on hearing the great successes that are going on. But is there a way of doing this that is really outside the box? Representative Baining mentioned the Swedish system. What can we pull from that? Are there other countries that are doing innovative kinds of things? We don't have to do the same old, and just tweak it here and there. I hope that we create something entirely new that takes the best of everything that we've heard.
I'm going to go with the 3 R's. Relationships, relevance, and rigor. We've heard a lot today about rigor, and someone talked about rigor is not the number of students that fail. It's the number. It's about providing purpose. And so I think that to do that, that gives us our relevance. And today, as we talked about students and individuality and all the opportunities that are out there and individual success, it's going to take a lot of relationship building to get that done. So.
I will go with the top 3. And he talked about, he asked, what do you think that all the students should know or have for them to be successful in a career pathway? And these are things that I've heard from everyone, from the ideas of exposure and accessibility. So we have a lot of work on that. And then relevance, helping them identify their strengths, their passion, and their interests, because sometimes what they're good at is not necessarily their passion. I found out for myself. And then demonstrating their content, their work ethic, and the skills that they've either applied, they've learned. Those are the top 3 things that we need every student to do. So we have a task. Our challenge is valuing personalization and equity, but structuring it for the mass. That's a big challenge for this task force.
I'm left today with, I think we need to encourage our students to plan for success. And I think as early as a teacher can do that in the classroom or parents can do that at home, I think it helps kids to think long term. A lot of kids think, well, when's recess, or when do I get home, or when do I get on the bus? But I think we also have to have them think long-term of what is it going to take me to be successful in life, and what do I have to do to get there. And I think hard work is one of the key components that we need to teach our kids. A lot of people don't want to work hard anymore, and they think there's an easy way out. I get my college degree, and somebody's going to offer me a $50,000 job. I can buy a $150,000 house. I can buy a $35,000 car, and I'm set now. And it just doesn't happen that way for most people. You got to work hard, and you got to work a long time sometimes to reach your goals. But I think it's good to have excellent goals. I think part of that planning is to set goals. They can change over your life, but what do I want to accomplish in my life, and what's the goals that I want to achieve in my life?
I had so many different ways that I was going with this, but I think for me, in listening to everyone else here, is how do we, because I thought Dr. Folk said it right earlier, outcomes look a little different for every kid, right? And so how do we create a system that's broad enough and innovative enough that we can get to that and allow schools to do the things that they're already doing or the things that they want to develop, right? Now that's a big task. I get that. But for also that to not be, the other thing, and it's interesting because I've heard different people say it different ways. I have heard different people call it an alternative to the way we're doing it now, or an ECA. I hate that. I'll just be honest. I don't like to look at this as an alternative. I want to look at it as this is what we're doing for our children, and this is what we're doing for them, not to them, so that we can allow them to be ready. So I just want us to really continue to think about how do we make it broad enough? How do we make it, we talk simplistic as well. How do we make it so that we know what those standards are, those outcomes, because I like that outcome piece, but how do we make it so that it can be broad enough so that every student can succeed?
I do want to thank the panel for allowing me to be a collaborator today. I also was very hopeful and encouraged and inspired by these conversations, hearing kind of we're all on the same team, we're all in that same driven part, and the one word that came up more than anything was actually students, and that this is focused on personalizing education for students, and that federal legislation has boxed them in for years, and now we're getting ready to break them out and make it look like something that's never happened before. It's going to require a lot of collaboration between many different parties, between the business world, higher ed, traditional pubs, magnet schools, charter schools, private schools, home schools, everyone, career centers, to get this so that we can provide this for our students. And basically the way that I see it is that all of the pathways that are going to be created are going to lead to a student's empowered and self-selected future. And that's what I think is very important for our kids.
How you doing, everybody? My name is Roy Dobbs. I've been kind of quiet. I was gleaning from all the expertise in the room. But what I do right now is currently I work with at-risk students, and I'm just kind of taking all this in. And there's a lot of things that were said, and I'm not going to try to give it all back or anything like that. But I do want to talk about something that's really passionate to me, and that is purpose, finding purpose in every student. And one of the things that I talk to my students about is, you have to find what your purpose is in life. We all have one. Yours may be different than the next person's, but we all have one. Greatness is within everybody. And what we talk about when we talk about careers is your career will be a platform for you to further invest in people. I'm really big on mentorship and things of that nature, and someone invested in me, many people invested in me, and that's why I'm here today. I don't have time to give you my backstory, but based on my backstory, there's no reason in the world why I should even be sitting in here as an educator. So you could probably figure what kind of student I was. So your career is an opportunity for you to invest in other people. Then we also talk about your career is an opportunity for you to give back to others in your community. And finally, your career will be an opportunity for you to inspire someone else. So as we leave today, I guess the biggest thing that I'm thinking about is who can I invest in immediately when I go back to my job, here in a few minutes. Who can I invest in? Who can I speak a word of life into? Who can I tell they have a purpose? Who can I just impact even today? And how can I teach them to impact others with whatever path they choose to pursue in life? So it's really about the purpose pathway for me. Thank you.
Awesome. What a great discussion. Dr. Butts, you made my day. To know that you were reading my blog while you're eating breakfast, that's pretty cool, right? But another thing in there was that of course, I want to be a rock star, so I hung out with a rock band, right? And that's why I got to know some
I
of that
did want to let
stuff.
you know that we do have programs at Ben Davis that can still get you that goal if you want to come back.
I might come
It's a
back.
10-year program, though, right?
I might come back for that. But another piece in there was a promise is not enough. And I know, and John, I appreciate when you kind of said this last time, that the struggle, right? You called it a struggle today, and actually I'm proud of that because I know this is different. There are those who would say, "Gosh, you guys ought to have a plan right now." In my opinion, that would be very irresponsible because the promise was going into this that we were going to listen to everyone and we were going to have these discussions and we were going to try to hash these things out, right? That looks interesting when you're in a public setting and the media and you're live streaming and an audience and what have you, right? But I do appreciate the fact that we've heard from everyone. We have a lot of things to think about. It is a struggle. It's like a rubber band, right? I mean, it is. But I think that's a good thing, and we owe it to our kids that we're having this struggle to get to this point and then to really think about what do they look like or what is a pathway. Jason, we can always count on you to define when we need a definition, so I appreciate that. But honestly, this great discussion, I think those that were watching or have been here would have to say that is as well. We appreciate everybody's values, everything that you've brought to the table with this, and just can't wait till the next one. I do actually get anxious for the next one, which is next week, next Tuesday, a week from today, same time, same channel. So Jeff, kind of think through what the blog post you want to read the next time is. Maybe I can come up with something. All right. Thank you all. We stand adjourned.
What did you say? Tony Hahn. Yes, that's right. Yeah, Tony Hahn. Very good. You remember. I looked it up there. Very good. So did you know anybody around the table or anything? Good. Yeah, very good. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
I will leave the binder and I'll take the insert.
Okay, and I will work with what I got to make sure you have
Thank you. Thank you. It'll work. I like the result of my little short notes on the meeting. It gets me thinking, right? It's a good resource for later.
Senator, can we get any I will send I'll call.